The special agent slid the document across the metal table. His finger tapped the bottom right corner. "Sign here, Ms. Perry. Once the ink dries, your father and brother face 15 years in federal prison." I picked up the pen. The metal felt cold against my knuckles. I did not hesitate. I did not ask for a moment to think. I signed my name in blue ink and pushed the paper back across the table. But to understand how a daughter gets to the point where she freezes her own family's bank accounts, you need to go back, 6 months back, to the day my aunt stood up at my sister's $80,000 wedding and handed me the final excuse I needed to stop pretending we were a family. Welcome back to Olivia Stories Revenge. If you have ever been the family scapegoat, the one expected to pay the bills while sitting in the back row, drop a comment with your age and tell me I am not alone. Hit subscribe because the way this ends is the exact kind of justice they deserve. My sister Savannah was the beautiful one. She spent her 20s trading beauty pageant crowns for brand sponsorships. My brother Harrison was the genius. He wore tailored suits and pitched tech startups. I am Genevieve. I am 33 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am a forensic accountant. I look for money people try to hide. Savannah's wedding took place at an estate in Asheville. Orchids draped from the ceiling. A string quartet played in the corner. Liam, my fiancé, sat next to me at table 19. Table 19 was pushed up against the kitchen swinging doors. Every time a waiter passed, the smell of roasted garlic and dish soap washed over us. Aunt Brenda clinked her champagne flute. She stood at our table, her face flushed from expensive wine. She waved her hand toward me, catching the attention of the wealthy guests at table 18. "Oh, don't mind her," Brenda laughed, pointing her acrylic nail right at my face. "That is Genevieve. She is the ugly one we try not to mention." The laughter rippled across the surrounding tables. My cheeks burned. I stared down at the white tablecloth, tracing the woven pattern with my thumb. Liam shifted his chair closer to mine, his knee pressing against my leg. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His jaw locked. Before the laughter could die down, a man at table 18 stood up. He did not smile. He wore a dark wool suit, the kind you don't buy off a rack. He walked around Aunt Brenda, ignoring her outstretched hand, and stopped right behind my chair. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a black business card, and set it on the tablecloth next to my water glass. "I am not laughing," the man said. His voice carried over the string quartet. "In fact, the only reason I am at this wedding is to figure out where my $4 million went." He turned and walked toward the exit. I looked at the card. Elias Thorne, venture capitalist. I lifted my head and looked toward the head table. Harrison was gripping the edge of the linen, his knuckles white. A bead of sweat dripped down his temple. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, his eyes darting toward the exits. My father, Thomas, was already out of his chair, intercepting Elias near the coat check, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Liam leaned in. His voice was a quiet hum near my ear. "Did you see Harrison's face?" "I saw it," I whispered. I picked up the black card. The edges were sharp. For 33 years, I had been the family workhorse, the reliable background character meant to stay quiet and pay her own way. They thought my silence was weakness. I pushed my chair back. I told Liam I needed my laptop from the coat room. The humiliation in my chest was gone. It had been replaced by something cold, precise, and hungry. The coat room was cool and quiet. The heavy mahogany doors muffled the bass thumping from the reception hall. I found my tote bag on the top shelf, pulled out my laptop, and walked into the deserted hotel lobby. The carpet absorbed the click of my heels. The smell of roasted garlic and expensive perfume faded, replaced by the sterile scent of floor cleaner and old leather. I chose a high-backed chair in the far corner facing the entrance. Liam joined me 2 minutes later. He handed me a glass of club soda with lime, sat in the adjacent chair, and opened his phone to wait. He knew my process. He knew I needed silence to work. I flipped open my screen and tethered it to my mobile hotspot. Working on public Wi-Fi is a rookie mistake, and I am not a rookie. I logged into the North Carolina Secretary of State Business Registry. My fingers moved over the keys out of pure muscle memory. I typed Harrison Perry into the registered agent's search bar. The loading wheel spun. The heavy scent of gardenia hit me before I saw her. My mother, Barbara, marched across the lobby. Her silver dress rustled with every sharp step. She clutched a beaded evening bag in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. She did not look at Liam. She stood over me, casting a shadow across my keyboard. "What are you doing out here?" she snapped. Her voice held that familiar, tight edge. "Your sister is about to cut the cake. People are asking questions." I looked up from the screen. Aunt Brenda just introduced me to a table of strangers as the ugly one we try not to mention, Mom. I think they have all the answers they need. Barbara waved her hand, dismissing the moment like a gnat. "Oh, Brenda had too much champagne. You are too sensitive, Genevieve. Put the computer away. We have an actual problem." She dropped the folded paper directly onto my keyboard. "The catering manager is demanding final payment before they serve the dessert course," she said. "Savannah is in tears in the bridal suite. The credit card machine declined your father's platinum card. The bank put a fraud alert on it because of the travel charges." She tapped a manicured fingernail against the paper. "It is $12,000. I need you to cover it." $12,000. Just handed to me, like a bar tab. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was an invoice from Southern Elegance Catering. The logo was generic, printed in a cheap, cursive font. For a decade, I had been the silent safety net. I paid off Harrison's first credit card when he was 19. I covered the down payment on Savannah's car when she crashed her previous one. I did it because my mother always used the same 3 words to force my hand. "Family helps family," Genevieve Barbara said, leaning closer. Her gardenia perfume was suffocating. "Your brother is tied up with his investors, and your father is dealing with the venue manager. Write the check. Savannah will pay you back after the honeymoon." I looked at the invoice again. A normal sister would scream. A normal daughter would point out the cruelty of begging for a 5-figure bailout mere minutes after allowing her to be publicly humiliated. I did neither. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my leather-bound checkbook. I did not pull out my personal registry. 3 weeks ago, I registered a new limited liability company. I named it Apex Holdings. I created it to manage some freelance consulting revenue, but legally, it was a standalone corporate entity. I clicked my pen. I wrote out $12,000 payable to Southern Elegance Catering. On the memo line, I wrote, "Corporate Vendor Disbursement." I tore the check along the perforated line and held it out. Barbara snatched it. She did not look at the name on the top left corner. She did not read the memo line. She just saw the numbers. She smiled a victorious expression that pushed the wrinkles around her eyes into sharp relief. "See," she said, sliding the check into her beaded bag. "You can be helpful when you want to be. Now come back inside before you embarrass your sister any further." As she turned and walked away, a stray thought drifted into my mind, sudden and sharp. My father's platinum card was declined. Why would my father use a personal credit card for a 5-figure event bill when he always prided himself on his immaculate bookkeeping? Thomas Perry was a man who still used vintage software to track every dime. It was the same reason he insisted on coming to my townhouse every single month to physically pick up my mail. He always claimed he needed to handle my property taxes to save me the headache of dealing with the county assessor. I had allowed it because it seemed like a harmless quirk of an aging man who needed to feel useful. But watching my mother walk away with a corporate check, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Why did a man who micromanaged my property taxes have his credit card declined at his own daughter's wedding? I pushed the thought down. Focus on the paper trail in front of you. I picked up the catering invoice Barbara had tossed on my keyboard. The generic cursive logo sat above a mailing address and a 9-digit employer identification number. An EIN is a federal tax footprint. It is impossible to fake. I switched tabs on my browser. I went to the federal tax registry and input the 9 digits from the invoice. If this was a legitimate business operating in Asheville, there would be years of tax filings, health department scores, and vendor licenses attached to that number. The database processed the request. The screen flashed white, then populated with a single PDF document, Articles of Organization. I opened the file. The registered name was Southern Elegance Catering, LLC. The formation date was exactly 4 months ago, right around the time Savannah announced her engagement. I scrolled down to the registered agents section. The name listed there was not a chef. It was not an event coordinator. It was Harrison Perry. The breath left my lungs. I read the name again. Then I read the listed business address. It was a post office box in a strip mall 3 miles from my parents' house. There was no catering company. The food we ate tonight was likely prepared by contractors paid in cash. The $12,000 invoice my mother just handed me was a fabricated document. My brother created a fake company to bill his own family for his sister's wedding. But the reality was much darker than that. By demanding I pay the balance, my mother was unwittingly acting as a mule. She was taking my money and funneling it directly into Harrison's pocket. And since I paid it from Apex Holdings, they had just crossed state and federal lines into corporate fraud. My mother cashing that check would be the legal chain tying her to the crime. I looked at Liam. He was watching my face, reading the shift in my posture. "What did you find?" he asked quietly. I did not answer him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the thick black card Elias Thorne had dropped on the tablecloth. I typed the number into my phone and pressed call. It rang twice. A deep voice answered on the third ring. Thorne. I kept my eyes on the PDF on my screen. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Genevieve Perry. You left your card at table 18. The line was quiet for a second. "I remember. What do you want, Ms. Perry?" I kept my voice perfectly level. "You didn't just lose $4 million tonight. You funded a money laundering operation, and I know exactly how he is washing the cash." The coat room was cool and quiet. The heavy mahogany doors muffled the bass thumping from the reception hall. I found my tote bag on the top shelf, pulled out my laptop, and walked into the deserted hotel lobby. The carpet absorbed the click of my heels. The smell of roasted garlic and expensive perfume faded, replaced by the sterile scent of floor cleaner and old leather. I chose a high-backed chair in the far corner facing the entrance. Liam joined me 2 minutes later. He handed me a glass of club soda with lime, sat in the adjacent chair, and opened his phone to wait. He knew my process. He knew I needed silence to work. I flipped open my screen and tethered it to my mobile hotspot. Working on public Wi-Fi is a rookie mistake, and I am not a rookie. I logged into the North Carolina Secretary of State Business Registry. My fingers moved over the keys out of pure muscle memory. I typed Harrison Perry into the registered agent search bar. The loading wheel spun. The heavy scent of gardenia hit me before I saw her. My mother Barbara marched across the lobby. Her silver dress rustled with every sharp step. She clutched a beaded evening bag in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. She did not look at Liam. She stood over me, casting a shadow across my keyboard. "What are you doing out here?" she snapped. Her voice held that familiar tight edge. "Your sister is about to cut the cake. People are asking questions." I looked up from the screen. Aunt Brenda just introduced me to a table of strangers as the ugly one we try not to mention, Mom. I think they have all the answers they need. Barbara waved her hand, dismissing the moment like a gnat. "Oh, Brenda had too much champagne. You are too sensitive, Genevieve. Put the computer away. We have an actual problem." She dropped the folded paper directly onto my keyboard. "The catering manager is demanding final payment before they serve the dessert course," she said. "Savannah is in tears in the bridal suite. The credit card machine declined your father's platinum card. The bank put a fraud alert on it because of the travel charges." She tapped a manicured fingernail against the paper. "It is $12,000. I need you to cover it." $12,000. Just hand it to me, like a bar tab. I picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was an invoice from Southern Elegance Catering. The logo was generic, printed in a cheap cursive font. For a decade, I had been the silent safety net. I paid off Harrison's first credit card when he was 19. I covered the down payment on Savannah's car when she crashed her previous one. I did it because my mother always used the same 3 words to force my hand. Family helps family, Geneviève Barbara said, leaning closer. Her gardenia perfume was suffocating. Your brother is tied up with his investors, and your father is dealing with the venue manager. Write the check. Savannah will pay you back after the honeymoon. I looked at the invoice again. A normal sister would scream. A normal daughter would point out the cruelty of begging for a 5-figure bailout mere minutes after allowing her to be publicly humiliated. I did neither. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out my leather-bound checkbook. I did not pull out my personal registry. 3 weeks ago, I registered a new limited liability company. I named it Apex Holdings. I created it to manage some freelance consulting revenue, but legally, it was a standalone corporate entity. I clicked my pen. I wrote out $12,000 payable to Southern Elegance Catering. On the memo line, I wrote, Corporate Vendor Disbursement. I tore the check along the perforated line and held it out. Barbara snatched it. She did not look at the name on the top left corner. She did not read the memo line. She just saw the numbers. She smiled a victorious expression that pushed the wrinkles around her eyes into sharp relief. See, she said, sliding the check into her beaded bag. You can be helpful when you want to be. Now come back inside before you embarrass your sister any further. As she turned and walked away, a stray thought drifted into my mind, sudden and sharp. My father's platinum card was declined. Why would my father use a personal credit card for a 5-figure event bill when he always prided himself on his immaculate bookkeeping? Thomas Perry was a man who still used vintage software to track every dime. It was the same reason he insisted on coming to my townhouse every single month to physically pick up my mail. He always claimed he needed to handle my property taxes to save me the headache of dealing with the county assessor. I had allowed it because it seemed like a harmless quirk of an aging man who needed to feel useful. But watching my mother walk away with a corporate check, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Why did a man who micromanaged my property taxes have his credit card declined at his own daughter's wedding? I pushed the thought down. Focus on the paper trail in front of you. I picked up the catering invoice Barbara had tossed on my keyboard. The generic cursive logo sat above a mailing address and a 9-digit employer identification number. An EIN is a federal tax footprint. It is impossible to fake. I switched tabs on my browser. I went to the federal tax registry and input the 9 digits from the invoice. If this was a legitimate business operating in Asheville, there would be years of tax filings, health department scores, and vendor licenses attached to that number. The database processed the request. The screen flashed white, then populated with a single PDF document, Articles of Organization. I opened the file. The registered name was Southern Elegance Catering, LLC. The formation date was exactly 4 months ago, right around the time Savannah announced her engagement. I scrolled down to the registered agents section. The name listed there was not a chef, it was not an event coordinator, it was Harrison Perry. The breath left my lungs. I read the name again. Then I read the listed business address. It was a post office box in a strip mall 3 miles from my parents' house. There was no catering company. The food we ate tonight was likely prepared by contractors paid in cash. The $12,000 invoice my mother just handed me was a fabricated document. My brother created a fake company to bill his own family for his sister's wedding. But the reality was much darker than that. By demanding I pay the balance, my mother was unwittingly acting as a mule. She was taking my money and funneling it directly into Harrison's pocket. And since I paid it from Apex Holdings, they had just crossed state and federal lines into corporate fraud. My mother cashing that check would be the legal chain tying her to the crime. I looked at Liam. He was watching my face, reading the shift in my posture. "What did you find?" he asked quietly. I did not answer him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the thick black card Elias Thorne had dropped on the tablecloth. I typed the number into my phone and pressed call. It rang twice. A deep voice answered on the third ring. Thorne. I kept my eyes on the PDF on my screen. "Mr. Thorne, my name is Genevieve Perry. You left your card at table 18. The line was quiet for a second. I remember. What do you want, Ms. Perry? I kept my voice perfectly level. You didn't just lose $4 million tonight. You funded a money laundering operation. And I know exactly how he is washing the cash. The coffee shop in the South End district of Charlotte smelled of roasted espresso beans and wet asphalt. Rain streaked the plate glass windows. I sat in a booth near the back, nursing a black coffee. Elias Thorne arrived exactly at 9. He did not wear a tie today. His tailored charcoal suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing a crisp white shirt. He slid into the booth opposite me, placed a leather folio on the table, and signaled the barista for a black tea. We did not exchange pleasantries. Small talk is a currency neither of us needed to spend. I opened my notebook. I explained the catering shell company. I told him how my brother used a fake federal tax footprint to bill his own family for a wedding reception, and how my mother acted as the courier for the funds. Elias listened. His expression remained carved from stone. He stirred his tea once, set the spoon on a napkin, and leaned forward. Harrison is a fool, Elias said. His voice was low, carrying a precise cadence. He lacks the discipline to orchestrate a fraud of this scale on his own. He is a charismatic face, nothing more. I kept my pen steady. If you knew he was a fool, why did your firm wire his startup $4 million? Elias looked out the window at the morning traffic. I did not invest in Harrison. I invested in your father. The statement hung in the air between us. Thomas Perry. For 30 years, my father served as the senior vice president of a regional commercial bank. He was a fixture at the country club. He sat on the board of 3 local charities. He was a man whose handshake was considered collateral by every wealthy family in the county. He cultivated an image of unshakable integrity. Elias opened his leather folio. He pulled out a stack of printed emails and a glossy pitch deck. Harrison brought me the concept, Elias continued. But Thomas provided the data. Your father personally delivered the minimum viable product metrics. He sat in my office and walked my analysts through the projected user acquisition costs. He leveraged his 40 years of unblemished banking history to guarantee the venture. He co-signed the investment documents. I was conned by the legacy of Thomas Perry, not the supposed genius of his son. I stared at the paperwork. My father, the man who scrutinized every grocery receipt my mother brought home, had falsified software metrics to steal millions from a venture capital firm. The catering bill was just a tiny leak in a staggering dam of corruption. Elias slid a silver flash drive across the wooden table. It rested next to my coffee cup. My internal forensic team is already pulling the public filings, Elias said, but they do not know the players. They do not know the family dynamics, the hidden properties, or the blind spots. You found a money laundering vehicle in 10 minutes using a hotel internet connection. I want to hire you as an independent investigator. I want you to dismantle your family's financial architecture. I looked at the silver drive. Accepting it meant crossing a line. It meant severing the blood tie forever. But the blood tie had always been a one-way transaction. They demanded my loyalty while offering me up as a punchline to strangers. I picked up the drive. I will need full access to the original bank routing numbers, I said. You have them, Elias replied. Find my money, Genevieve. I drove back to my townhouse in silence. The rain washed the city streets clean. Liam was waiting in the kitchen when I arrived. He had taken the day off from his engineering firm. A heavy canvas tool bag sat on the quartz countertop. I set my laptop on the kitchen island and plugged in the silver drive. Liam did not ask me how the meeting went. He read the tension in my shoulders. He walked over to the front door, unscrewed the standard strike plate from the door frame, and replaced it with reinforced steel hardware. He swapped the half-inch screws for 3-inch lag bolts that anchored deep into the wall studs. He understood the reality of our situation. My family was not just entitled or annoying. They were criminals. When people facing federal prison realize they are trapped, they stop playing by polite rules. Liam was making sure our home could withstand a desperate reaction. I opened the main ledger file on the drive. the screen filled with rows of financial data. A forensic audit is like dissecting a living organism. You look for the pulse. You follow the blood flow. I started with the initial $4 million deposit. A legitimate tech startup has a predictable burn rate. They pay software developers, they lease cloud server space, they purchase hardware, they rent office space. Harrison's company had none of those expenses. There was not a single tax form filed for a software engineer. There were no receipts for web hosting. The tech startup had not produced a single line of viable code. It was a ghost ship floating on a sea of stolen cash. I tracked the outbound wires. The capital was drained with terrifying speed. Less than 48 hours after Elias transferred the funds, the money began to fracture. $700,000 moved to a consulting firm registered in Delaware. $1 million shifted to a logistics group in Nevada. $500,000 was wired to an offshore holding account in the Cayman Islands. I ran the tax identification numbers for the domestic consulting firms. They were all shell companies. Some were registered under Harrison's name. Others were registered under variations of my father's middle name. It was a labyrinth designed to confuse standard banking algorithms. They were looting the venture capital fund in synchronized steps. The money flowed out of the tech company and washed through the shell entities, emerging clean on the other side. This clean money funded the bespoke suits, the country club dues, and the $80,000 weddings. My family built a shiny, perfect facade on a foundation of deliberate corporate theft. I sat back on my bar stool. The glow of the laptop screen illuminated the dark kitchen. Liam walked over and set a fresh cup of green tea next to my hand. He looked at the labyrinth of offshore transfers mapping the screen. "They took everything," Liam stated softly. "They did," I replied. "But they left a trail. They were arrogant. They thought no one would ever look past my father's pristine reputation." I began drafting a flowchart linking the Delaware shell companies back to the Central Tech Fund. I needed to isolate the specific accounts Savannah was using to fund her lifestyle. If I could freeze the endpoint distribution accounts, the entire money laundering machine would back up and choke on its own output. My phone sat on the counter next to my notebook. The screen lit up with a sudden notification. The quiet hum of the device broke the silence in the kitchen. I glanced at the screen. It was an alert from Instagram. Savannah was broadcasting a live video to her 50,000 followers. I tapped the notification. The video loaded. Savannah was not sitting on a white sand beach in Bora Bora. She was standing in the middle of an airport terminal. The background noise was chaotic, filled with rolling suitcases and boarding announcements. Savannah was crying hysterically. Her mascara was smeared down her cheeks. She held her phone with a trembling hand, aiming the camera at her own face. Behind her, I could see the frosted glass doors of the exclusive first-class airline lounge. They locked me out. Savannah sobbed to her audience, her voice cracking. The attendant cut my card in half. The bank declined everything. I leaned closer to the screen. Savannah held up the pieces of her premium black credit card. The plastic was severed right through the magnetic strip. "My honeymoon is ruined," she wailed, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "We are stuck in the terminal. I do not understand what is happening." The video continued to broadcast her panic to thousands of strangers. I watched my sister break down in real time. The fraudulent wealth that protected her for years had just vanished in an instant. I picked up my pen and wrote down the name of the bank embossed on her broken credit card. The consequences of my father's actions were finally catching up to his golden child. But the puzzle was still missing a crucial piece. The video did not end with the broken credit card. Savannah needed a villain. She wiped her eyes, looked directly into the lens, and gave her audience exactly what they wanted. "My older sister Genevieve is doing this," Savannah said. Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "She handles the family trust. She has always been bitter that I found happiness first. She waited until I was at the airport to freeze my travel funds, just to humiliate me on my honeymoon." The live stream disconnected. For 5 seconds, the kitchen was silent. Then my phone began to vibrate. It vibrated so hard it inched across the quartz countertop. I picked it up. Savannah had tagged my personal profile in the broadcast. Her 50,000 followers mobilized with terrifying speed. Direct messages flooded my inbox. "You are a jealous spinster," one stranger wrote. "Let your sister have her special day," another typed. "You are a monster for ruining her trip to Bora Bora." I scrolled through the vitriol. I did not feel angry. I felt a clinical detachment. Savannah had spent her entire life insulated from consequences. When the protective bubble finally cracked, her instinct was not to question why her card was declined. Her instinct was to point a finger at the designated family scapegoat. She truly believed I had the power to ruin her, because blaming me was easier than admitting her new husband and her genius brother could not afford her lifestyle. I muted my notifications and set the phone face down. I turned back to the silver flash drive Elias Thorne gave me. I opened a fresh spreadsheet. I titled the document, "The Savannah Audit." For the next 3 days, the townhouse became a war room. Liam managed the outside world. He answered the door, signed for packages, and kept the coffee pot full. I sat at the kitchen island, dissecting my sister's financial footprint. I assumed Savannah was the black hole. When a venture capital fund loses $4 million in 6 months, you look for the most obvious leak. Savannah lived a life designed to burn capital. I tracked the routing number from her broken premium card through the banking network. It led straight back to one of the Delaware shell companies Harrison registered. I pulled the transaction history for that specific shell entity. The ledger was a monument to narcissism. There were invoices for luxury condo rentals in the most expensive zip code in Charlotte. There were receipts for imported floral arrangements, exclusive gym memberships, and weekly spa retreats. I found a string of wire transfers to a private aviation broker for weekend trips to Tulum and Miami. I documented the Cartier bracelets, the designer shoes, and the $80,000 wedding reception. I itemized every single purchase. I built pivot tables to categorize the spending. My eyes burned from staring at the harsh blue light of the monitor. My shoulders ached. But I did not stop until I reached the bottom of the ledger. I highlighted the final cell and ran the sum function. The total expenditure sat at $740,000. I stared at the number. It was a staggering amount of money to spend in under 2 years. It was enough to bankrupt a normal family. But it was not $4 million. I recalculated the columns. I double-checked the routing numbers. I audited the offshore accounts for any hidden luxury purchases. The result remained the same. Savannah was incredibly expensive, but the math did not add up. Even accounting for taxes, processing fees, and the wedding, her lifestyle only consumed a fraction of the missing venture capital. I leaned back on my stool and rubbed my temples. I had spent 3 days chasing a red herring. Savannah was not the mastermind. She was not even a partner in the scheme. She was a useful idiot. My father and my brother funded her visible, extravagant lifestyle to create an aura of limitless success. In the world of tech startups, perception is currency. If the CEO's sister is flying on private jets and wearing diamonds, investors assume the company is highly profitable. The fake-it-till-you-make-it strategy requires a shiny billboard. Savannah was their billboard. She was too self-absorbed to ever question where the deposits came from, making her the perfect oblivious front. Liam walked into the kitchen carrying a plate of sliced apples and almonds. He set it next to my keyboard. He looked at the spreadsheet, his eyes scanning the final total at the bottom of the screen. "You look frustrated," he noted, pulling up a stool beside me. "I am chasing ghosts," I replied. "I thought she spent it all. I thought her vanity drained the fund. But she is just a symptom. $3 million is still missing." Liam studied the intricate flowchart I had taped to the wall. The chart mapped the flow of funds from Elias Thorne to Harrison, then splintering into the various shell companies. "You are auditing the exhaust," Liam said. His voice was calm, grounding the chaotic energy in the room. "You are looking at the smoke and trying to figure out how the car works. Stop looking at the superficial expenses. Look at the bedrock. Look at the foundation they built this on." I looked at him. He was right. I was focusing on the noise because Savannah was loud. The real hemorrhage of cash was buried somewhere quiet. Before I dive back into the corporate ledgers, I need to secure our own perimeter, I told him. If they are willing to create fake companies and launder money, I need to ensure my personal financial walls are fortified. I opened a new tab in my browser. I navigated to the Primary Credit Reporting Bureau. As a forensic accountant, I monitor my clients' profiles constantly, but I rarely check my own. My financial life was an open book. I paid my mortgage on time. I carried 0 credit card debt. I owned my vehicle outright. For 15 years, my credit score sat perfectly at 810. I clicked the login button. The security portal prompted me with 2-factor authentication. I typed in the code sent to my phone. The dashboard loaded. A circular graph appeared in the center of the screen displaying my current risk assessment. The breath caught in my throat. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very thin. I blinked, hoping the screen would refresh and correct the error. It did not change. My credit score was no longer 810. It was 610. A 200-point drop is not a minor fluctuation. It does not happen because you missed a utility bill or opened a new department store card. A plummet of that magnitude requires a catastrophic financial event. It means a severe default, a bankruptcy, or a substantial new debt obligation. I felt a cold sweat break across my collarbone. The fraud was not just out there in Delaware shell companies or offshore accounts. The rot was not confined to my brother's fake tech startup. Someone had breached my foundation. Someone had attached a staggering amount of debt to my name. My finger hovered over the mouse. The trackpad felt warm under my skin. 610. 3 digits that signaled a financial catastrophe. I moved the cursor toward the red icon labeled derogatory marks. I needed to see the source of the bleeding. Before I could press the button, a shadow swept across the frosted glass of the front door. The heavy crunch of tires rolling over the wet driveway gravel echoed through the quiet kitchen. Liam turned his head. He stepped away from the island and walked to the front window. He pulled the blinds back a fraction of an inch. "Your father is here," he said. I stood up. The stool scraped against the hardwood floor. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I saw the silver grille of a pristine luxury SUV. My father, Thomas Perry, shifted the vehicle into park. For decades, Thomas commanded every room he entered. He was a man who believed his presence alone required deference. He stepped out of the driver's side door wearing a pressed navy polo and tailored khaki trousers. He looked like a man preparing to play 18 holes at the country club, not a man arriving to confront his daughter. I walked toward the entryway. Liam was already there. He did not reach for the deadbolt. He waited for my nod. I gave it. Liam turned the lock and pulled the heavy door open. Thomas stood on the porch. The smell of sandalwood aftershave and expensive leather seeped into the house. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing after the disaster in Asheville. He looked at me with the tired irritation of a regional manager dealing with a difficult employee. Geneviève, he began, his voice carrying that familiar, practiced resonance. "We need to clear up this nonsense right now. I have been on the phone all morning. Elias Thorne froze the capital accounts. Your brother is locked out of his own operational funds." Thomas took a step forward, assuming I would retreat into the foyer. I did not move. Neither did Liam. "I need you to get on the phone with Elias," Thomas continued, gesturing vaguely with his hands. "You are an auditor. You understand how these seed rounds work. I need you to vouch for Harrison. Tell Elias the expenditure reports are pending and that freezing the accounts is a breach of the investment agreement. You can smooth this over." Thomas took another step, attempting to push past us into the hallway. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Occupy the physical space, own the narrative. He leaned his shoulder forward. Liam shifted his weight. He did not raise his hands. He did not shove my father. Liam simply stepped directly into the center of the doorframe. He became a stone pillar. Thomas bumped against Liam's chest and stopped. The older man looked up, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Move out of my way," Thomas said. Liam looked down at him. His expression remained neutral, but his voice was a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You are not coming inside, Thomas." My father blinked. He was unaccustomed to being denied entry anywhere, let alone at a property he considered an extension of his own domain. He took a half step back, smoothing the front of his polo shirt. "Fine," he scoffed, shifting his gaze back to me. "Genevieve, tell your fiancé to back off. You are tearing this family apart over a minor paperwork error. Harrison just misfiled a few initial invoices. It is a simple administrative mistake, and you are treating your own flesh and blood like criminals." I looked at the man who raised me. I searched his face for any sign of remorse. There was none. He was playing a role. He was the exasperated patriarch trying to corral a hysterical daughter. Throughout my childhood, he used this exact tone to dismiss my achievements while magnifying my siblings. When I bought this townhouse at 27, he told me the neighborhood was a poor investment. Now he stood on my porch demanding I use my professional credibility to shield a sinking ship. It was a minor paperwork error, I repeated, keeping my tone dead flat. Like the Delaware holding companies, like the $12,000 invoice you tried to launder through my mother at the reception. Thomas stiffened. The muscles in his jaw tightened. His eyes darted to the left, scanning the empty street behind him. I took a step closer to the threshold. My voice did not rise. It dropped into a cold, forensic register. "You are not here to protect Harrison. Harrison does not have the discipline to set up an offshore tax shelter. He does not have the clearance to falsify metric reports. But you do. You walked into the venture capital firm and used your pristine banking legacy to guarantee an empty shell. You are the architect, Dad." The authoritative facade cracked. The confident posture evaporated, replaced by genuine, raw panic. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. He realized in that exact moment that I was not guessing. I was reading his blueprint. For a second, he looked like a terrified old man facing the collapse of his entire world. But fear in men like Thomas quickly metabolizes into venom. He pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You listen to me," he snarled, his voice losing its polished resonance. "You think you are so smart because you crunch numbers for a living. I spent 30 years building relationships in this city. I know every managing partner in Charlotte. I know the executives who sign your paychecks. You make one phone call to the authorities, and I will have you blacklisted from every financial institution in the state. You will never work in this industry again." He was breathing heavily. His chest heaved under the navy fabric. I watched his fingers shake. I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. "You cannot blacklist the person holding the ledger, Dad," I said. "I already have the routing numbers. I have the wire transfers. I have the proof." Thomas stared at me. The threat hung in the humid air, hollow and useless. He had no leverage left. He lowered his hand, turned on his heel, and walked fast toward his vehicle. He practically fell into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. He threw the SUV into reverse, the tires tearing up the gravel, and sped down the street without looking back. I watched the red taillights disappear around the corner. The silence of the neighborhood rushed back in. Liam closed the heavy front door and engaged the deadbolt. The click of the lock echoed in the entryway. "He handled that poorly," Liam noted, walking back toward the kitchen. "He is terrified," I said, following him. "He thought I was just throwing a tantrum. Now he knows I am building a case." The adrenaline from the confrontation began to recede, leaving a cold clarity in its wake. I walked back to the kitchen island. My laptop screen was still glowing. The circular graph displaying my ruined credit score sat exactly where I left it, 610. My father had driven across town to intimidate me. He risked a physical altercation just to demand I unfreeze the accounts. His panic was too visceral, too immediate. It meant the financial collapse was not just imminent, it was already happening. I needed to know what kind of weapon he had buried in my foundation to prompt such a desperate visit. I sat on the stool. I placed my hand over the mouse. My pulse thumped steady and slow against my wrist. I moved the cursor over the red alert icon. I clicked the button to open the detailed credit report. The portal loaded the derogatory marks section. A new window populated with black text. I read the first line. My lungs stopped working. The air trapped in my throat felt like glass. The alert was not a credit card default. It was not a missed car payment. It was a formal notice of pre-foreclosure. On my own home. The black text on the white background stared back at me. Notice of pre-foreclosure. The words did not compute. I bought this townhouse when I was 27 years old. I skipped vacations. I drove a reliable sedan with manual windows. I poured every freelance paycheck and annual bonus into the principal balance. As of last month, the remaining mortgage on this property sat under $30,000. I was less than a year away from owning the walls around me free and clear. I clicked the link to expand the creditor details. The screen populated with a new ledger. The original mortgage provider was not the entity initiating the foreclosure. The alert stemmed from a secondary commercial lender based in Atlanta. I scanned the column labeled Principal Obligation, $500,000. My chest tightened. An invisible vice gripped my ribs. Someone had attached a $500,000 encumbrance to my property. The loan originated 8 months ago. The amortization schedule showed 0 payments had been made. The account was in severe default, triggering the automatic pre-foreclosure status. I pushed my chair back from the kitchen island. The physical space around me suddenly felt alien. The quartz countertops, the custom cabinets Liam installed, the hardwood floors I sanded by hand. It was all collateral. A question pierced through the rising panic. Before a lender initiates foreclosure proceedings, they send warnings. They send certified letters. They flood your mailbox with delinquency notices and demands for cure. I had received nothing. My mailbox contained only utility bills, junk mail, and wedding invitations. Then the memory surfaced. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. My father standing on this very porch on the first Saturday of every month. He always wore his golf attire. He always held a stack of envelopes wrapped in a rubber band. Just saving you a trip to the county assessor, Genevieve. Let me handle the property taxes. You work too hard already. For years, he insisted on picking up my mail to manage the municipal filings using his vintage CPA software. I thought it was an old man clinging to his former role as the financial head of the household. I thought he wanted to feel needed. It was not an act of paternal care. It was an interception operation. Thomas Perry had been systematically filtering my mail. He stood in my driveway, smiled at my face, and pocketed the bank warnings. He stole the certified letters. He hid the default notices while drinking my coffee. He weaponized my trust to blindfold me while he sold the roof over my head. The betrayal shifted. The shell companies and the venture capital fraud were corporate crimes. This was a home invasion. My family viewed my independence not as an achievement, but as an untapped asset they could harvest. Liam walked up behind me. He read the numbers over my shoulder. He saw the creditor name. He saw the principal balance. He did not ask how this happened. He understood the implications immediately. He placed his hand on my shoulder, a firm, grounding weight. He pulled his phone from his denim pocket and stepped away from the kitchen island. He walked into the living room and dialed a number. David, Liam said, his voice dropping into a flat, no-nonsense register. I know it is the weekend. I need you to open your laptop. We have a fraudulent commercial lien on Genevieve's primary residence. I need an emergency injunction to halt a foreclosure proceeding. Yes, send the retainer agreement. Liam was calling David Hirsch one of the most ruthless real estate litigators in North Carolina. While Liam built the legal wall I needed to provide the ammunition, I needed the origination documents. I turned back to the laptop. I logged out of the credit bureau and accessed the county clerk public records portal. Every property deed lien and mortgage note filed in the county is digitized and searchable. I typed my parcel identification number into the database. The property history populated. There were 3 entries: the original deed of sale, my primary mortgage, and a third document filed 8 months ago labeled Commercial Bridge Loan Agreement. I paid the nominal processing fee and downloaded the PDF. The document was 40 pages of dense legal boilerplate. I scrolled past the indemnification clauses and the interest rate schedules. I was hunting for the final pages. To secure a bridge loan of this magnitude, the lender requires physical collateral. In this case, the collateral was my townhouse. To bind the property, the legal owner must sign the promissory note. I reached page 39, the signature block. There was a printed line bearing my full legal name, Genevieve Elise Perry. Above the printed line was a signature in blue ink. I leaned close to the monitor. The room faded away. I stared at the curves and strokes of the ink. It spelled my name, but the execution was entirely wrong. My capital G always has a sharp angled top. This signature featured a rounded sweeping loop. The trailing Y lacked my characteristic downward slash. It was a forgery. It was a decent attempt, likely copied from an old birthday card or a high school transcript, but any handwriting expert would dismantle it in 5 minutes. My father forged my signature to leverage my home, funneling $500,000 to keep Harrison's fake tech company afloat just a little longer. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated my tongue. As a forensic accountant, I dissect fraud every single day. I know the protocols. I know the fail-safes. Commercial lenders do not hand over $500,000 based on a mailed document. A loan of that size requires stringent verification. It requires a notary public to witness the signature. It requires the presentation of 2 forms of government-issued identification. It requires a physical, verifiable presence. Thomas Perry could not simply walk into an Atlanta bank, slide a forged piece of paper across the desk, and walk out with $500,000. Even with his pristine banking legacy, the underwriter would demand legal proof that Genevieve Elise Perry consented to the encumbrance. My father needed a skeleton key. He needed a legal instrument that allowed him to bypass the bank's security, bypass the notary, and sign on my behalf without my physical presence or knowledge. He needed a proxy. I opened a new tab. I bypassed the county records and logged directly into the North Carolina State Judicial Database. This portal tracked every legal instrument registered in the state, from marriage licenses to corporate charters to proxy agreements. If Thomas possessed a legal instrument powerful enough to strip me of my assets, it had to be registered here. I clicked the search bar. I did not type my father's name. I typed my own. I hit enter. The system queried the state archives. The loading wheel spun a small blue circle rotating against the white background. I waited for the database to reveal the exact mechanism of my ruin. The loading wheel spun. The small blue circle rotated against the white background, pulling data from the state judicial archives. My breathing felt shallow. The fan inside the laptop whirred, breaking the silence of the kitchen. The screen refreshed. A single document appeared under my name. It was a PDF file. I clicked the link. The document loaded, displaying the seal of the state of North Carolina. I read the title printed in bold black letters across the top. Durable and Medical Power of Attorney. The date stamped in the upper right corner was 15 years old. The digital hum of the laptop faded. It was replaced by a memory so vivid it brought the sharp smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol into the room. I was 18 years old. I lay in a narrow hospital bed in the intensive care unit. A severe respiratory infection had placed me there for 9 days. A plastic identification band scratched against my thin wrist. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor marked the slow passage of time. I felt weak, frightened, and overwhelmed by a profound sense of guilt. My parents made sure I understood the cost of my illness. They discussed the deductibles and the out-of-network specialist fees while standing at the foot of my bed. I felt like an expensive burden weighing down the family ledger. On the morning of my discharge, my father walked into the room. He wore his tailored banking suit. He carried a leather portfolio. He did not ask how my lungs felt. He unzipped the portfolio and handed me a clipboard with a stack of papers attached. "Sign these, Genevieve," he said. His tone was brisk and efficient. "It is standard procedure, a medical directive and a power of attorney, just in case things get complicated. Again, it allows me to handle the insurance claims on your behalf so you can focus on resting. I wanted to be helpful. I wanted to alleviate the financial stress I believed I had caused. I took the blue pen he offered. I did not read the dense legal boilerplate. I trusted the man standing over me. I signed my name where he pointed. He took the clipboard, checked the ink, and slipped the papers back into his leather portfolio. I forgot those papers existed the moment we drove out of the hospital parking lot. My father did not forget. He kept that document dormant in a filing cabinet for a decade and a half. He waited. While I went to college, built my career, and bought my home, that piece of paper sat in the dark. A durable power of attorney grants the holder the legal right to sign contracts, access bank accounts, and bind real estate on behalf of the principal. When Harrison's fake tech company ran out of stolen venture capital, Thomas Perry knew exactly where to find a fresh influx of cash. He dug out a 15-year-old signature obtained from a sick, guilty teenager. He likely paid off a corrupt notary to stamp the backdated form. Then he walked into a commercial lending office, presented the legal instrument, and borrowed $500,000 against my townhouse. I stared at the digitized copy of the form on my screen. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. I thought about Aunt Brenda at the wedding reception. I thought about the laughter echoing across table 18. She called me the ugly one. My family treated me like a disappointing fixture. They criticized my 6-year-old Toyota parked next to their leased luxury SUVs. They mocked my off-the-rack suits while Savannah wore imported silk. They viewed my modest, debt-free townhouse as a lack of ambition. They laughed at my boring life. But my boring life was built on bedrock. Their beautiful lives were built on vapor. When the venture capital evaporated, when the offshore shell companies ran dry, their shiny world began to collapse. And when they needed a lifeline, they could not mortgage their designer clothes. They could not borrow against their country club memberships. My boring, stable, unglamorous foundation was the only concrete asset they had left to steal. They did not mock me. They mined me. I was the quarry they extracted resources from to keep the illusion running. Something shifted inside my chest. It was a quiet, profound change. The last fragile thread of daughterly affection snapped. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel the sting of betrayal. Betrayal is an emotion reserved for people you still trust. I was no longer looking at my father, my mother, or my siblings. I was looking at financial predators. I minimized the state database and opened my word processor. I typed out the penal codes for the state of North Carolina. I detailed the definitions and sentencing guidelines for felony wire fraud. I added the statutes for aggravated identity theft and bank fraud. I connected my laptop to the wireless laser printer sitting on the home office desk across the room. I hit print. The printer hummed to life. I sent the forged commercial bridge loan deed to the queue. I sent the 15-year-old power of attorney document. I sent the catering shell company invoices. I walked over to the desk. The warm pages slid into the output tray one by one. I gathered them, aligned the edges, and slipped the thick stack into a fresh manila folder. I placed a blank white label on the tab. I wrote the word evidence in stark black ink. Liam walked back into the room. He had finished his phone call with the real estate litigator. He held a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. He walked over to the desk, set the ceramic mug down next to my hand, and looked at the thick manila folder. He looked at my face. He saw the shift in my posture. He saw the cold, unblinking focus in my eyes. "David is filing the emergency injunction on Monday morning," Liam said quietly. "The foreclosure is frozen. Your house is safe for now." "What do you want to do about the rest of it?" He gestured toward the folder. "Burn it down," Liam said. His voice was a flat, declarative statement. I took a sip of the coffee. The bitter heat grounded me. "That is the plan," I replied. I carried the folder back to the kitchen island and sat down at my laptop. If I was going to dismantle their operation, I needed to trace every single dollar of the bridge loan. I needed to know exactly who received the stolen funds from my home. I accessed the clearinghouse records attached to the commercial lender. The $500,000 dropped into an escrow account. From there, it was wired directly to one of Harrison's primary Delaware shell entities. I followed the digital breadcrumbs. The shell entity acted as a distribution hub. It sent $50,000 to a law firm in Atlanta. It sent $20,000 to a public relations agency in Los Angeles. Then I spotted a familiar vendor name, a luxury private aviation broker. Savannah had flown to Bora Bora on a private jet before her credit cards were declined at the terminal. I assumed the aviation broker was paid from the dregs of the venture capital fund. I clicked the transaction ledger to verify the payment route. The math shifted. The numbers on the screen told a different story. The aviation broker did not receive a wire transfer from the Delaware Shell Company. They did not receive funds from Harrison's tech startup account. The bridge loan money had not been used to pay for Savannah's flight. The payment for the jet originated from an entirely separate source. I stared at the routing number listed on the clearance receipt. It belonged to a regional credit union. It was an account number I had never seen before. It was not tied to Elias Thorne. It was not tied to the commercial lender. I copied the 9-digit routing number. I pasted it into a reverse lookup banking directory. The system identified the institutional branch. I needed to know whose name was on that account. I ran a cross-reference check against my family's known financial footprints. The result populated on the screen. The account holder was not Harrison. It was not Thomas. It was a trust account. I read the name of the primary beneficiary attached to the trust, and the remaining breath left my lungs. The financial predation had just reached backward through time, violating a promise made to the dead. The name on the screen stared back at me. Margaret Elise Perry, my grandmother. She passed away 4 years ago. She lived in a small, neat house in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. She kept a meticulously organized ledger of her household expenses on the kitchen table. She did not trust credit cards, and she did not trust my father's banking advice. She used to squeeze my hand and tell me, "Keep your own books, Jenny." A man who spends time convincing you he is wealthy is usually borrowing the suit. When she died, she left the bulk of her modest estate to be divided equally. But she included a specific stipulation in her will. She established a dedicated trust account containing exactly $50,000. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. The funds were explicitly earmarked for my future wedding or the purchase of my first home. Because I was single at the time and already had a mortgage, the money sat untouched. According to the estate documents, Thomas acted as the executor of the trust until I formally requested the disbursement. I had completely forgotten about the account. I never asked my father for the statements. I assumed the money was resting safely in the credit union, waiting for the day Liam and I decided to plan a ceremony. I looked at the wire transfer receipt again. The payment to the luxury private aviation broker for Savannah's honeymoon flight to Bora Bora totaled $49,800. I opened the transaction ledger for the grandmother's trust account. The balance history told a brutal, precise story. For 4 years, the account held a steady balance of $50,000, accumulating minor interest. Then the timeline shifted. The date of the massive withdrawal was stamped clearly in the left column. It was Sunday, the morning after Savannah's $80,000 wedding reception. While I sat in the hotel lobby reeling from the public humiliation of Aunt Brenda's insult, while Elias Thorne dropped his black card on the table, while the catering manager threatened to shut down the dessert service, my father was executing a different kind of theft. Thomas realized the venture capital fund was completely dry. He realized Harrison's shell companies were empty. Savannah and her new husband were demanding the private jet they were promised for their honeymoon. My father could not use his platinum card because the fraud alerts were already freezing his personal lines of credit. He needed untraceable cash immediately. He logged into the credit union portal using his executor credentials. He initiated an emergency wire transfer. He drained my grandmother's wedding gift to me down to the last $200 to pay for Savannah's luxury flight. They did not just forge my signature to mortgage my home. They literally stole my future to fund Savannah's present. They took the only piece of financial security my grandmother managed to leave behind and burned it as jet fuel so my sister could post photos above the Pacific Ocean. Any remaining shadow of hesitation evaporated. The lingering instinct to protect the family name, the ingrained habit of being the quiet, responsible daughter, simply burned away. My sadness crystallized. It compressed into pure, weaponized competence. I closed the credit union portal. I did not need to see anymore. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the black business card. Elias Thorne answered on the first ring. He did not say hello. He simply waited for me to speak. "Mr. Thorne," I began. My voice carried the flat, cold resonance of a machine. "I have finished the preliminary audit." "What is the status of the capital?" he asked. "The original $4 million is gone," I stated, "washed through Delaware entities and offshore holding accounts. I have mapped the entire network. But the theft did not stop with your firm. My father forged a durable power of attorney to leverage my primary residence for a $500,000 commercial bridge loan. He also embezzled a $50,000 trust account designated for my use." The line was silent for 3 seconds. When Elias spoke, his tone was sharper. The veneer of polite venture capitalism dropped away. "Your father is a desperate man," Elias said. "Desperate men leave careless trails. Do you have the documentation proving the forgery and the embezzlement?" "I have the original filings, the wire transfer receipts, the fraudulent shell company tax ID numbers, and the forged signature blocks," I replied. "I have printed the entire chain of custody." "Bring it to my office immediately," Elias instructed. "My legal team is preparing the civil filings to freeze his remaining visible assets." "No," I countered. I stopped pacing the kitchen. I leaned against the court's counter and looked out the reinforced front window. Civil filings are too slow. If you file a standard lawsuit, Thomas will use the discovery period to destroy the offshore routing numbers. He will panic and attempt to flee. Or worse, he will try to liquidate Savannah's remaining assets to hire a defense attorney who specializes in delaying tactics. "What are you proposing?" Genevieve Elias asked. "I am officially shifting from a defensive audit to an offensive legal strike," I told him. "Do not file the civil suits yet. I want you to hand my documentation over to your legal team with specific instructions. We are going to draft a trap. We are going to put them in a room, present them with a seemingly routine financial obstacle, and let their own arrogance force them to commit perjury on the record. I want to hand them to the federal authorities wrapped in a bow." I could hear the slow, measured sound of Elias exhaling. "I will assemble the senior partners. Be here in an hour." I ended the call. I gathered the thick manila folder labeled Evidence from the desk. I placed it inside my leather tote bag. Liam handed me my car keys. He did not ask for details. He saw the cold determination settling over my features. "Drive safe," he said. "Call me when the trap is set." I drove downtown to the corporate headquarters of Elias Thorne's firm. The meeting lasted 4 hours. I sat in a glass-walled conference room with 3 elite corporate litigators and a former federal prosecutor now working in private practice. I walked them through the flowcharts. I explained the power of attorney forgery. I showed them the stolen trust funds. By the time I left the building, the legal machinery was in motion. The trap was designed, baited, and waiting for the right moment to snap shut. I drove back to my townhouse as the sun began to set. The Charlotte skyline glowed orange and purple in my rearview mirror. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely free from the burden of my family's expectations. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was the architect of their ruin. I parked my car in the driveway and walked up to the front porch. Liam had left the porch light on. I unlocked the reinforced deadbolt and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Liam sat at the kitchen island. His laptop was open. The screen displayed a chaotic grid of social media notifications. His face was tense. He looked up as I closed the door. "You need to see this," he said, turning the screen toward me. Savannah had not accepted her ruined honeymoon quietly. Finding herself stranded at the airport, cut off from the stolen wealth that defined her existence, she did what influencers do when they lose control of their narrative. She weaponized her audience. Savannah launched a coordinated, vicious smear campaign. She posted a heavily edited video collage, the footage cut between her tearful face in the airport terminal and out-of-context photos of me looking stern at family gatherings. She did not just call me jealous, she escalated the lie. "My sister is a corporate embezzler," Savannah declared to the camera, her voice dripping with venom. "She manages our family retirement accounts. She stole my honeymoon fund out of spite. She is trying to bankrupt our parents because she hates that we are happy." The video already had 80,000 views. The comment section was a toxic sludge of strangers demanding justice for the beautiful bride. But Savannah did not stop at character assassination. She wanted professional destruction. In the caption below the video, she tagged the official social media accounts of the forensic accounting firm where I worked. She listed the firm's public phone number and their corporate email address. "Call them," Savannah instructed her followers. "Tell them they are employing a thief. Demand that they fire Genevieve Perry. Do not let her get away with ruining my family." I stared at the screen. My sister, who funded her entire existence with stolen money, was actively directing an angry mob to destroy my legitimate career. She was trying to strip away the only remaining stable piece of my life. Monday morning arrived with a heavy, gray sky. I drove into the Charlotte Financial District, my hands resting lightly on the leather steering wheel of my reliable sedan. The morning commute is usually my time to mentally organize client portfolios and prepare for scheduled audits. Today, my mind was focused entirely on the impending collision. Savannah had spent the entire weekend directing her digital army to attack my professional reputation. I knew the fallout would be waiting for me the moment I stepped off the elevator. I parked in the underground garage and took the express elevator to the 14th floor. The polished brass doors opened into the reception area of Sterling & Associates. The atmosphere in the lobby was usually a study in hushed corporate efficiency. This morning, it sounded like a crisis center. The main switchboard was lit up with dozens of blinking red lights. Sarah, the front desk coordinator, had a phone pressed to her ear while her fingers flew across her keyboard. She looked up when I walked through the glass doors. Her eyes widened. She placed her collar on a brief hold and waved me over. "Genevieve," Sarah whispered, glancing nervously down the hallway. "The phones have not stopped ringing since Sunday night. We are getting hundreds of calls. People are screaming about stolen retirement funds and demanding you be fired. Our online review page dropped 2 full stars over the weekend." I gave her a reassuring nod. "Route all subsequent calls to the overflow voicemail," I instructed. "Do not engage with them." "Where is Catherine?" "She is waiting for you in her office," Sarah replied. Catherine Sterling was the senior managing partner of the firm. She built her reputation dismantling corporate embezzlement rings in the late 90s. She did not tolerate scandal, and she despised public drama. A social media mob attacking her firm was the exact type of chaos that usually resulted in immediate termination to protect the brand. I walked down the hallway. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor. I did not feel the anxiety that normally accompanies a summons to the senior partner. I felt the cold, hard weight of the leather briefcase hanging from my shoulder. I knocked twice on the heavy oak door and let myself in. Catherine stood by her floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city skyline. She wore a tailored gray suit that acted as a sort of professional armor. She turned around and walked over to her sprawling mahogany desk. Her tablet was open, displaying the paused frame of Savannah's tearful airport video. "Good morning, Genevieve," Catherine said. Her tone was measured, betraying zero emotion. I spent my morning coffee listening to a young woman tell 50,000 people that my top forensic accountant is a thief. Care to explain why our switchboard is currently under siege? A lesser employee would have crumbled. They would have cried, pleaded for their job, or launched into an emotional defense about family toxicity. I did none of those things. I approached the desk, opened my briefcase, and pulled out a thick, meticulously tabbed binder. I placed it squarely on the polished mahogany surface. The heavy thud echoed in the quiet office. "That young woman is my sister Savannah," I stated. And the story she is telling her audience is a desperate smokescreen. She is attempting to weaponize her followers because her husband and our father just ran out of stolen money. Catherine lowered her gaze to the binder. She recognized the format. It was the exact structure we used when presenting evidence to federal prosecutors. I opened the cover. I pointed to the first red tab. That section contains the wire transfers linking my family to the theft of $4 million in venture capital seed money, I explained. The second tab documents how my father forged a durable medical power of attorney to leverage my primary residence for a commercial bridge loan to hide the missing capital. The third tab outlines his embezzlement of my late grandmother's estate to pay for the private aviation charter Savannah was trying to board when she filmed that video. Catherine did not interrupt. She sat down in her leather chair and began turning the pages. Her eyes scanned the routing numbers, the shell company tax identification filings, and the forged signature block on the bridge loan. She read the emails from Elias Thorne. She studied the paper trail with the practiced eye of a veteran auditor. I stood in silence and let the math do the talking. The numbers told a story of predatory fraud that no tearful influencer video could ever overwrite. Catherine closed the binder. She rested her hands on the cover. The stern, interrogative expression vanished from her face. The corners of her mouth twitched upward into a sharp, approving smirk. They thought a social media mob could intimidate a forensic accounting firm? Catherine noted, shaking her head slightly. How remarkably foolish. She reached for her desk phone and pressed a single extension button. David, Catherine said, addressing the firm's general counsel. We are currently experiencing a coordinated defamation campaign directed by an individual named Savannah Perry. I am forwarding you a link to her platform. I want a preservation of evidence letter sent to her hosting providers within the hour. Then I want you to draft a formal notice of intent to sue for tortious interference and corporate defamation. Let her know that every hour that video remains active adds another $50,000 to the damages claim. Catherine hung up the phone. She slid the binder back toward me. Your job is secure, Genevieve. Keep your head down, finish your trap with Elias Thorne, and let my legal department handle your sister's digital army. We do not negotiate with loud amateurs. I thanked her, took my binder, and walked back to my office. The feeling of victory was profound. Savannah tried to strip away my livelihood, and she failed instantly. The firm became an impenetrable shield. I spent the next 3 hours compiling the final offshore routing numbers for Elias. Just before noon, my cell phone vibrated on the edge of my desk. The caller ID displayed Liam. I answered the call. Hey, I said, expecting him to ask about lunch. Are you safe right now? Liam asked. His voice was rigid. It lacked its usual warmth. I am in my office, I replied, standing up from my chair. What happened? Someone just threw a brick through our front window, Liam stated. The air in my office suddenly felt very cold. The corporate warfare I was navigating just crossed a terrifying boundary into physical violence. I am coming home, I said. Do not speed, Liam instructed. The perimeter is secure. I am waiting in the living room. I grabbed my keys and left the building. The drive back to the townhouse felt like it took hours. My mind raced through the implications. My father was desperate, but he was a man who hid behind tailored suits and forged signatures. Throwing a brick required a different kind of reckless stupidity. I pulled into my driveway. The sight of my home made my stomach twist. The large custom pane of glass flanking the reinforced front door was shattered. Shards of glass littered the porch and glittered in the midday sun. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The cold autumn wind blew freely into the living room. Liam stood near the couch, holding a broom. He pointed to the center of the hardwood floor. A heavy red landscaping brick sat on the rug. Wrapped tightly around the center of the brick with a thick rubber band was a folded piece of white paper. Liam had already unrolled it, using the tip of a pen to preserve fingerprints. I walked over and looked down at the paper. The message was written in erratic, jagged block letters. Drop the lawsuit or lose everything. It was a pathetic theatrical threat. They realized they could not outsmart me in the ledgers, so they resorted to breaking glass. "I called the police 20 minutes ago," Liam said, leaning the broom against the wall. "The patrol officers collected the brick and the note for evidence. They logged it as criminal mischief and terroristic threatening." "Did anyone see who threw it?" I asked. Liam walked over to the kitchen island and picked up his tablet. He opened the security application linked to our exterior cameras. "We do not need a witness," Liam replied, pressing play on the video file. The black and white footage showed our front porch. A late-model luxury sedan idled at the curb. A man stepped into the frame. He wore expensive designer athletic wear. He looked frantic, his head darting back and forth to check the street. He raised his arm, hurled the brick directly into the window, and sprinted back to the idling car. I hit pause and zoomed in on the man's face. It was Derek, Savannah's entitled new husband. Derek married into my family believing he was securing a lifetime of country club dinners and easy wealth. When the money vanished and his wife found herself stranded in an airport, Derek realized the luxury life he bargained for was a mirage. Savannah was likely at home weeping. My father was scrambling to hide his tracks, and my brother was entirely useless. Derek decided to play the enforcer to protect his disappearing inheritance. He just handed the Charlotte police a felony on a silver platter, I said, staring at Derek's panicked face on the screen. Liam closed the tablet. We spent the rest of the day cleaning up the glass. Liam drove to the hardware store, purchased a thick sheet of plywood, and bolted it securely over the broken window frame. The physical damage was contained, but the atmosphere in the house remained incredibly tense. Evening fell. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The wind rattled against the fresh plywood in the living room. I sat on the couch reviewing the police report number Liam had written on a notepad. Then a set of headlights swept across the living room wall. I stood up and walked to the front window, peering through the unbroken pane of glass. A large luxury SUV parked at the edge of our driveway. The engine cut off. 4 car doors opened simultaneously. My father, Thomas, stepped out of the driver's seat. My mother, Barbara, emerged from the passenger side. Derek stepped out of the back, avoiding eye contact with the boarded-up window he shattered hours earlier. But they did not come alone. 2 older men in dark suits stepped out of a second vehicle parked behind the SUV. I recognized them immediately. They were senior elders from my parents' church. I watched the 5 of them march up my driveway in a tight, self-righteous formation. They broke my window, threatened my livelihood, and now they were showing up with religious authority to perform a fake intervention. They expected me to cower. They expected me to surrender. I turned to Liam. He was already standing, his posture relaxed, but ready. "Let them in," I said. "I want them to see exactly what they are defending." Liam unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the front door open. The autumn wind swept into the foyer, carrying the scent of damp leaves and car exhaust. The group of 6 stepped over the threshold. Thomas led the procession. He held his chin high, his posture radiating a practiced, pious authority. Barbara followed closely behind him, clutching a leather handbag like a shield. Derek walked in third. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the floorboards, carefully avoiding the large sheet of plywood bolted over the shattered front window. Harrison brought up the rear, escorting the 2 older men in dark suits. My brother looked exhausted. The confident tech genius from the wedding was gone, replaced by a man whose tailored suit hung loosely on his shoulders. He looked like he had not slept in days. The 2 older men were Elder Vance and Elder Hayes. They served on the senior leadership council of my parents' church. They were men who built their lives on moral grandstanding and community influence. Thomas had clearly drafted them to serve as his personal jury. He intended to use their presence to shame me into submission. Liam closed the door. The click of the latch sealed the 7 of us inside the living room. Genevieve Thomas began, his voice dropping into a soft, sorrowful register. It was the tone of a disappointed shepherd addressing a lost sheep. "We did not want to intrude on your evening, but your mother and I are deeply concerned about the path you are walking down. We brought Elder Vance and Elder Hayes to help mediate this crisis." He gestured toward the 2 older men. They offered me identical, tight-lipped smiles of pity. I stood near the kitchen island. I did not offer them a seat. I did not offer them water. I simply waited. You have let jealousy blind you, Thomas continued, stepping further into the living room. You are attacking your own brother. You are making wild accusations against my character. You are trying to sabotage your sister's new marriage out of spite. It is tearing your mother apart. Barbara produced a tissue from her handbag and dabbed at the corner of her eye. She let out a soft, rehearsed sniffle. Thomas turned his attention to the plywood covering the broken window. "And look at how you are living," he said, shaking his head. "You are so consumed by this baseless vendetta that you are neglecting your own home. You have neighborhood vandals breaking your windows. This toxicity is poisoning your life, Genevieve. It is time to repent for this greed. It is time to drop these absurd investigations and return to the family fold." I listened to him preach. The sheer audacity of his performance was breathtaking. Standing in my living room was a man who stole my future to fund a private jet. Standing next to him was a woman who laundered stolen funds through a fake catering company. Hiding behind them was a coward who threw a brick through my window hours earlier. And they brought church leaders into my home to lecture me about morality. It was a surreal, delicious moment of dramatic irony. They believed they held the upper hand because they possessed the moral high ground. They had no idea that I already froze their operational accounts. They did not know I possessed high-definition security footage of Derek committing a felony. They were oblivious to the federal trap Elias Thorne was currently constructing in a downtown boardroom. They thought they were conducting an intervention. They were actually walking onto a crime scene and confessing. I did not yell. I did not defend myself against the accusations of jealousy. I did not point a finger at Derek and mention the brick. Arguing with a narcissist is a waste of breath. You do not debate a predator. You expose them. I turned away from Thomas and walked into the adjacent home office. I picked up the portable digital projector I use for client presentations. I carried it into the living room and set it on the coffee table. I plugged the power cord into the wall outlet and connected the video cable to my laptop. "What are you doing?" Barbara demanded. Her tearful act vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of irritation. "Your father is speaking to you." I ignored her. Liam reached over and flipped the switch for the overhead lights. The living room went dark. I tapped my keyboard. The projector hummed to life. A crisp, brilliant rectangle of white light hit the blank beige wall next to the boarded-up window. The sheer size of the projection dominated the room. I opened the first PDF file in my evidence folder. The invoice from Southern Elegance Catering appeared on the wall measuring 6 feet tall. Beside it, I displayed the state business registry filing. The name Harrison Perry glowed in stark black text as the registered agent of the shell company. "Your son billed you $12,000 for a fake catering company at his own sister's wedding?" I said. My voice was cool, steady, and devoid of emotion. "And you used me to pay for it, laundering the money across corporate lines." Elder Vance squinted at the wall. The pious pity on his face fractured, replaced by genuine confusion. He looked at Thomas. I did not give my father a chance to speak. I pressed the arrow key. The next slide loaded. It was the commercial bridge loan agreement. The document was magnified, making the forged signature on the bottom line larger than a human head. Next to the forged document, I placed a digital copy of the durable medical power of attorney. 8 months ago, my father used a 15-year-old medical proxy to bypass banking security, I explained to the room. He forged my signature and took out a $500,000 commercial lien against this very house. The home you are currently standing in is in pre-foreclosure because Thomas Perry stole the equity to cover a vanishing venture capital fund. Thomas opened his mouth. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The polished Sunday school teacher persona disintegrated. I pressed the arrow key one more time. The third slide appeared. It was the transaction ledger for Margaret Elise Perry, the grandmother's trust account. I highlighted the final line in bright yellow, the outbound wire transfer for $49,800. My grandmother left a dedicated trust for my future, I stated, staring directly into my father's pale face. Thomas was the executor. The morning after Savannah's wedding, he drained the account to zero. He used my wedding fund to pay for the private jet Savannah took to Bora Bora. The silence in the living room was deafening. The only sound was the low, steady hum of the cooling fan inside the projector. Elder Hayes stepped forward. He was a retired actuary. He knew how to read a banking ledger. He walked right up to the wall and traced the routing number on the trust transfer with his index finger. He read the executor's signature. He turned around slowly. The look he gave my father was one of profound, unadulterated disgust. Thomas Elder Hayes said, his voice trembling with quiet fury, "Did you bring us into this young woman's home to help you cover up a felony?" Thomas raised his hands, his palms facing outward. "Gentlemen, you have to understand. The business was struggling. I was trying to protect my family. These documents are taken out of context. Do not speak to me," Elder Vance snapped. He turned his back on my father. He looked at me, gave a stiff, formal nod of apology, and walked straight toward the front door. Elder Hayes followed him without a word. Liam opened the door to let them out. The two pillars of moral authority abandoned my parents in less than 3 minutes. The shield of public shame they tried to weaponize against me had just shattered over their own heads. Barbara realized the narrative was lost. She realized her husband was exposed. The panic finally breached her entitlement. She let out a shrill, piercing scream. "Turn that off!" she shrieked. She lunged across the living room rug. She tripped over the edge of the coffee table, her hands grasping wildly for the projector. She grabbed the thick black power cord and yanked it out of the wall socket with a vicious tug. The screen went black. The room plunged back into shadows. Barbara stood over the table, panting heavily, clutching the cord against her chest as if she had just slain a monster. But she was too late. Just before the power cut out, my presentation had automatically cycled to the next page in the folder. For 5 brief seconds, the projector displayed the intricate flowchart mapping the missing $4 million. It showed the venture capital seed money moving from Harrison's startup into the 3 offshore holding accounts in the Cayman Islands. I stood by the kitchen island, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light filtering in from the street lamps outside. I looked at Harrison. My brother had not moved since he walked through the front door. He stood near the entryway, his hands hanging limp at his sides. He was not looking at me. He was staring at the blank wall where the flowchart had just been projected. His face was a portrait of pure, unadulterated shock. His mouth hung slightly open. His brow was knitted together in profound confusion. I watched his eyes dart back and forth, tracing the invisible lines of a diagram that was no longer there. "What were those?" Harrison muttered. His voice was a raspy, hollow whisper. Thomas froze. He turned his head toward his son. His skin grew even paler. Harrison stepped away from the door. He walked toward his father, ignoring the broken glass and the tension in the room. He pointed a trembling finger at the blank beige wall. "The routing numbers on that last slide," Harrison said, his voice rising in pitch. "The transfers to the Cayman Islands. Millions of dollars. What were those accounts?" Thomas swallowed hard. He did not answer. "I never authorized those transfers," Harrison stated, his voice cracking. "I thought we spent the capital on domestic vendors. I thought the money was gone. Where did those offshore accounts come from?" I watched the exchange unfold. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place inside my mind. The entire dynamic of the Perry family fraud reorganized itself in a fraction of a second. Harrison was arrogant. He was entitled. He set up a fake catering company to steal $12,000. But Harrison did not steal $4 million. He was staring at the Cayman Island transfers with genuine bewilderment because he had never seen them before. He was the CEO of the tech startup, on paper. He was the public face of the company, but he did not control the money. My father did. Thomas did not just forge my signature. Thomas did not just drain the grandmother's trust. Thomas embezzled the massive venture capital fund right out from under his own son's nose. Harrison was not the mastermind. Harrison was the fall guy. The morning after the intervention collapsed, I sent a single text message to my brother. "Meet me at the Silver Diner on South Boulevard at 10 o'clock. Come alone. If you bring Derek or our parents, I drive straight to the FBI field office. I arrived 20 minutes early. The diner smelled of old bacon grease and black coffee. A bell jingled above the glass door every time a patron entered. I chose a booth in the far back corner, away from the windows, where the sticky red vinyl seats offered a clear view of the entrance. I ordered a hot tea. I placed my phone face up on the Formica table. I opened the voice memo application, tapped the red circle to begin recording, and locked the screen. The device looked like a standard idle phone. Harrison walked through the door at exactly 10. The tech visionary who posed in tailored suits for Savannah's wedding photos was gone. My brother looked hollow. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt missing a collar stay. Dark circles bruised the fragile skin under his eyes. He had not shaved in days. He scanned the diner, spotted me in the corner, and shuffled toward the booth. He slid into the vinyl seat across from me. He did not order anything when the waitress passed by. He rested his elbows on the table and laced his fingers together. He tried to assemble his features into a mask of confident authority, but the corners of his mouth trembled. Gmvia, he began, clearing a dry throat. Last night got out of hand. Mom and Dad overreacted. We need to handle this internally, like professionals. I took a sip of my tea. I did not say a word. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill the void. Harrison shifted his weight. I know you found some administrative irregularities with the catering vendor, he said, his voice dropping into a hushed, conspiratorial tone. And I know the venture capital burn rate looks bad right now. But I am pivoting. I am launching a new software service next quarter. It will eclipse the first project. If you drop this vendetta and unfreeze my operational accounts today, I will write you into the new operating agreement. I will give you a 20% equity stake in my next startup. It was a pathetic, desperate bargain. He was sitting across from a forensic accountant offering imaginary equity in a fake company to buy his way out of federal prison. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out the manila folder. I set it on the table right next to the recording cell phone. There is no next startup, Harrison, I stated. Your first company never existed. I opened the folder. I did not pull out the catering invoices or the forged property deed. I pulled out the offshore routing ledgers I had projected on my living room wall the night before. I turned the pages around so they faced him. Look at the screen grabs from the Cayman Island accounts I instructed. Harrison looked down. His eyes tracked the highlighted rows of numbers. He swallowed hard. I mapped the flow of the venture capital, I said, tapping my index finger against the paper. Elias Thorne wired $4 million to your business operating account. Less than 48 hours later, 90% of that capital was routed through a Delaware shell entity and funneled directly into these offshore holdings. I do not recognize those routing numbers, Harrison whispered. I swear to you, Genevieve, I thought we spent the seed money on the marketing firm in Los Angeles and the consulting group in Nevada. I pulled out a second sheet of paper. It was a cross-reference analysis I ran early this morning. I placed it over the routing numbers. You did not spend it on marketing, I explained. Those offshore accounts are not holding companies. They are payment portals for international sports syndicates and unregulated online casinos. Harrison stared at the word casino printed in the transaction details. He blinked, uncomprehending. Our father has a gambling addiction, I said. The words hung in the air cold and heavy. He has been hiding it behind his pristine country club legacy for years. He built a mountain of debt with dangerous creditors. When he could not borrow any more money against his own name, he needed a lump sum to save his life. The color drained from Harrison's face. He used you, I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. He knew you were desperate to be seen as a Silicon Valley visionary. He fed your ego. He helped you draft the pitch deck. He walked into Elias Thorne's office and used his 4 decades of banking credibility to secure the investment. He set up a tech startup as a vehicle to receive the cash. And the moment the funds cleared, Thomas diverted the money offshore to pay his bookies. No, Harrison gasped, shaking his head. No, Dad would not do that. He was helping me build an empire. I leaned forward over the Formica table. Who is listed as the registered agent on the tech startup Harrison? He did not answer. His breathing turned ragged. Who signed the federal tax forms to open the Delaware shell companies, I asked. Who signed the investment disclosures? Who is legally responsible for the fiduciary duties of the corporation? Me, Harrison choked out. A single tear broke loose and slid down his unshaven cheek. You are the CEO on paper, I confirmed, which means when the Securities and Exchange Commission traces the missing $4 million, they will not look at Thomas. They will look at the man who signed the corporate charters. Our father did not build you an empire. He built you a trap. He set his own son up to take the fall for wire fraud, to protect his reputation. The illusion of the golden boy shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. For his entire life, Harrison believed he was the favored child. He believed the tailored suits and the praise were real. Sitting in that diner booth, the brutal reality finally crushed him. He was never the prodigy. He was the sacrificial lamb. He was a human shield designed to go to federal prison so Thomas Perry could keep playing golf. Harrison placed his hands over his face. His shoulders began to heave. A ragged, guttural sob ripped through his chest. He cried in the middle of the diner, ignoring the waitress who paused in the aisle and turned away. I did not know Harrison wept into his palms. I just wanted the lifestyle. Savannah was getting everything. I just needed some cash to keep up appearances while the software was being developed. That is why I set up the catering company. He lowered his hands. His eyes were red and swollen. I faked the catering invoice for the wedding, Harrison confessed, his voice breaking. I just needed $12,000 to pay my rent and lease my car. I told Mom it was a real vendor. She did not know. I was just trying to survive until the venture capital unlocked. I never stole millions. I never wired anything to a casino. You have to believe me, Genevieve. He just admitted to corporate fraud and theft by deception, in his own voice, in a quiet diner. I believe you, I said. I reached across the table. I picked up my cell phone. I tapped the screen, stopped the voice memo recording, and saved the audio file under his name. Harrison stared at the device in my hand. His eyes widened as he realized what he had just done. The last remaining defense he possessed evaporated. I slid out of the vinyl booth and stood up. I placed a $5 bill on the table to cover my tea. I looked down at the broken, weeping man who used to call me the family failure. You should find a very good defense attorney, I told him, and you should never speak to our father again. I turned and walked toward the exit. The bell above the glass door jingled as I stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The parking lot was bright and clear. My family was officially destroyed. The internal loyalty that kept their crimes hidden had fractured beyond repair. They were turning on each other, terrified and desperate. The foundation of their pristine facade was reduced to rubble. I unlocked my sedan and sat in the driver's seat. I pulled up my text messages. I selected the contact thread for Elias Thorne. My thumbs moved quickly over the digital keyboard. I have the confession on tape, I typed. They are broken. Set the meeting. I hit send. The digital swoosh confirmed the delivery. The final act was now in motion. The text message from Elias arrived exactly 1 hour later. He simply provided an address in the financial district and a time, 3 o'clock on Thursday. The trap was set. Elias Thorne did not invite my family to his corporate headquarters. That would have put them on edge. Instead, he rented a neutral boardroom in a high-end commercial arbitration center. To compel their attendance, his legal team sent aggressive courier packages, threatening immediate default judgments and the freezing of all remaining personal assets if they failed to appear. It was a standard pressure tactic used in civil litigation to force panicked defendants to the negotiating table. Thursday afternoon arrived. The sky over Charlotte was a brilliant, cloudless blue. Liam and I walked into the arbitration center 15 minutes early. The boardroom was an expansive space dominated by a massive mahogany table. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. I took a seat near the head of the table. Liam sat next to me. Elias Thorne arrived a few minutes later, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He did not speak. He took his place at the head of the table, projecting an aura of calculated corporate menace. A fourth person entered the room. He was a young, unassuming man wearing a gray, off-the-rack suit. He carried a legal pad and a pen. Elias briefly introduced him as his junior counsel, tasked with recording the minutes of the meeting. The junior counsel nodded politely, walked to the far corner of the room, and sat down in a leather chair positioned slightly outside the immediate circle of power. At exactly 3 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open. My family walked in. They expected a grueling civil negotiation. They expected to haggle over percentages and plead for extended payment plans. Because they believed they were entering a civil dispute, they did not bring defense attorneys. Thomas assumed his decades of banking experience would allow him to outmaneuver Elias in a boardroom setting. Thomas led the procession. He had clearly spent hours preparing his appearance. He wore a pristine charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a silk tie. He walked with his shoulders thrown back, radiating an unearned arrogance. Barbara followed, clutching a designer handbag, her chin elevated in a display of practiced defiance. Savannah and Derek entered next. Savannah was dressed in a tailored cream pantsuit that cost more than my first car purchased entirely with stolen funds. She looked irritated, glancing at her phone, as if this meeting were an inconvenient disruption to her busy schedule. Derek trailed behind her, looking nervous and out of place in his athletic leisure wear. Harrison walked in last. He avoided my gaze. He looked pale and fragile, a shadow of the man who wept in the diner booth. They took their seats on the opposite side of the mahogany table. The physical distance between us felt like a chasm. Elias opened his leather portfolio. "We are here to discuss the outstanding balance of $4 million in venture capital seed money," he stated. His voice was cold, echoing slightly in the large room. "The operational accounts have been frozen due to gross mismanagement. I am offering you an opportunity to explain the disappearance of these funds before my firm initiates formal civil litigation." Thomas leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished wood. He offered Elias a tight, condescending smile. "Elias, let us be reasonable." Thomas began deploying his polished banking persona. "Startups are volatile. The market shifted unexpectedly. We encountered unforeseen development costs and rapid inflation in server housing. The funds were not mismanaged. They were simply consumed by a market downturn. It is unfortunate, but it is a standard risk in venture capital." Elias did not react to the lie. He looked at Harrison. "As the chief executive officer, do you corroborate this explanation, Harrison?" Harrison swallowed hard. He looked at his father, then he looked at the table. "Yes," Harrison croaked. The market shifted. The money was lost in development. I watched them lie. I watched them weave a fabricated narrative of corporate failure while sitting across from the forensic accountant who had already traced every stolen dollar to offshore casinos and luxury aviation brokers. Elias slid a stack of legal documents across the table. "If that is your official position, I require sworn affidavits stating exactly that Elias said. These documents confirm that the initial capital was lost due to standard market volatility and that no funds were diverted to unauthorized shell companies, offshore accounts, or personal expenditures. Sign these, and we can begin negotiating a civil settlement plan based on corporate bankruptcy." Thomas did not hesitate. He believed he had won. He believed he had successfully spun a massive embezzlement operation into a routine business failure. He picked up a gold fountain pen and signed his name with a flourish on the bottom line. He pushed the document toward his son. Harrison hesitated for a fraction of a second. His hand shook as he took the pen, but the instinct to follow his father's lead overrode his terror. He signed his name next to Thomas's signature. A notary public arranged by Elias stepped forward. She verified their driver licenses, stamped the documents, and collected the signed affidavits. Elias placed the notarized documents into his leather portfolio. "Let the record show that Thomas Perry and Harrison Perry have sworn under penalty of perjury that no funds were diverted to unauthorized entities," Elias stated. The junior counsel sitting in the corner scratched his pen across his legal pad, documenting the statement. The sound filled the silent room. Now Elias continued, turning his attention to Savannah. We must address the secondary issue, the unauthorized encumbrance of a property owned by Genevieve Perry. A commercial bridge loan of $500,000 was executed to prop up this failing venture. Savannah rolled her eyes. She leaned back in her expensive chair and sighed loudly. "I do not know anything about a bridge loan," Savannah declared, her voice dripping with entitlement. "I am just a brand ambassador. I am not involved in the corporate financing. Genevieve is just trying to drag me into this because she is obsessed with ruining my life." Elias looked at Thomas. "Did you execute a commercial bridge loan against your daughter's primary residence using a forged power of attorney?" Thomas stiffened. His arrogant smile vanished. "Absolutely not," he scoffed, his voice rising in indignation. "That is a preposterous accusation. I have never forged a document in my life. Genevieve signed that paperwork willingly and is now experiencing buyer's remorse." He lied again. He looked me in the eye and lied about stealing my home. "I require a sworn affidavit confirming you have no knowledge of a forged, durable medical power of attorney," Elias said, sliding another document across the mahogany expanse. Thomas snatched the pen and signed the paper so hard the nib nearly tore the parchment. He shoved it toward the notary. I sat at the head of the table. My face remained a mask of cold professionalism. I did not blink. I watched my father and my brother seal their own fates. They had walked into a boardroom expecting to negotiate a civil debt. Instead, they had just committed textbook perjury, signing fraudulent legal affidavits regarding wire fraud and identity theft. They had handed the federal government the final nails needed for their coffins. The rhythmic scratching of the junior counsel's pen echoed in the quiet room. Elias closed his leather portfolio. The soft click of the brass clasp sounded incredibly loud. He looked at the family sitting across from him. "Thank you for your cooperation," Elias said softly. His corporate menace melted away, replaced by something much more dangerous. He turned his head toward the quiet man sitting in the corner. "We have what we need," Special Agent Elias stated. Thomas frowned, his brow furrowed in confusion. He looked from Elias to the unassuming man with the legal pad. The junior counsel closed his notebook and stood up. He did not look like a corporate secretary anymore. His posture shifted, his shoulders squaring as he walked toward the center of the room. He reached inside the breast pocket of his gray suit jacket. He did not pull out a business card. He pulled out a leather wallet, flipped it open, and dropped a heavy gold badge onto the polished mahogany table. It landed with a solid metallic clatter right in front of Thomas Perry. "Securities and Exchange Commission," the undercover agent announced, his voice carrying the full, terrifying weight of the federal government. "You are not in a civil negotiation, gentlemen. This is a criminal investigation." The gold badge sat on the polished mahogany. The federal insignia reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The undercover agent kept his hand resting near the leather wallet, his posture rigid and commanding. "You just signed sworn affidavits containing deliberate fabrications regarding the diversion of venture capital funds and the unauthorized encumbrance of a primary residence," the agent said. "Perjury in a federal inquiry carries a severe penalty, gentlemen." Thomas stared at the gold shield. The color vanished from his face, leaving his skin the shade of wet ash. His pristine banking persona, cultivated over 40 years of country club handshakes and golf course negotiations, evaporated in a fraction of a second. He looked at the fountain pen still resting in his right hand. He looked at the notarized documents Elias Thorne had just secured inside the leather portfolio. He realized the trap. Harrison stopped breathing. He sat frozen in his expensive chair, his eyes darting between the badge and his father. I sat at the head of the table. My pulse remained steady. I watched the realization wash over them. They walked into this room believing they could outsmart the system, using the same arrogance that allowed them to steal my grandmother's trust. They did not understand that I had spent the last 2 weeks mapping their exact vulnerabilities, compiling a dossier so airtight it bypassed a standard investigation and went straight to a federal indictment. The undercover agent reached up and tapped a small earpiece hidden discreetly behind his collar. "We are clear," the agent said into the microphone. "Bring them in." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. They did not creak. They opened with a swift, decisive force. 4 men and 2 women stepped into the room. They wore dark tactical vests over plainclothes attire. The bold yellow letters printed across their chests read, United States Marshal. They moved with a synchronized, quiet efficiency that instantly suffocated any remaining oxygen in the room. This was not a negotiation. This was not a preliminary inquiry. Because Elias and I handed the authorities a pristine, fully documented ledger containing the wire transfers, the forged power of attorney, and the offshore casino routing numbers, the prosecutors did not need to hunt for evidence. They brought warrants. The lead marshal stepped forward. He carried a stack of manila envelopes. He looked directly at my father and my brother. Thomas Perry and Harrison Perry, the lead marshal, announced, his voice booming across the mahogany expanse. "We have warrants for your arrest. Please stand up and place your hands behind your backs." The metallic clink of handcuffs being unholstered echoed off the glass walls. The sound broke the spell holding my brother in his chair. Harrison leaped to his feet. His chair tipped backward, crashing onto the carpeted floor. He backed away from the table, holding his hands up in a frantic, pleading gesture. "No!" Harrison shrieked, his voice cracking into a high, panicked register. "Wait, you do not understand. I did not take the money. I did not wire anything to the Cayman Islands." A marshal stepped toward him, grasping his wrist with practiced authority. Harrison did not fight the officer, but he twisted his torso, aiming a trembling finger directly at our father. "Tell them," Harrison screamed, tears spilling over his eyelashes. "Tell them about the offshore casinos, Dad. Tell them about the gambling debts. He took the venture capital. He forced me to sign the corporate charters, to set up the shell companies so he could pay his bookies. I am just the name on the paperwork. He stole the $4 million. The boardroom rang with the echo of his confession. My brother, the golden child, the supposed tech visionary, publicly immolated our father to save himself. The unshakable family loyalty they demanded from me for 3 decades dissolved the moment the federal government produced a pair of steel cuffs. The marshal secured Harrison's wrists behind his back. The clicks of the locking mechanism sounded sharp and final. Thomas did not defend himself against his son's accusations. He could not. The patriarch who commanded every room he entered, the man who stood on my front porch and threatened to blacklist me from the financial industry, began to physically unravel. His chest heaved. He clutched the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. His knees buckled. Thomas sank into his chair, gasping for air. His tailored charcoal suit suddenly looked 3 sizes too large. Thomas Perry, the second marshal, said, stepping up to the broken man, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent." The marshal recited the Miranda warning while pulling Thomas's arms backward. My father did not resist. He stared blankly at the polished wood grain of the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled onto dry land. He was hyperventilating, his breaths coming in short, rapid wheezes. The illusion of his superiority was dead. He was just a thief caught at the end of a very clear ledger. At the far end of the table, Savannah snapped out of her shocked stupor. Her reality was collapsing. Her father and brother were in handcuffs, and her stolen wealth was gone. Her instinct, honed by years of curating a fake digital existence, kicked in. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her smartphone. She unlocked the screen and opened her camera application. She held the device up, aiming the lens at her tear-stained face, preparing to broadcast her victimization to her 50,000 followers. "You cannot do this to us," Savannah wailed toward the camera, ensuring her best angle was captured. "We are being framed. My sister set us up. Please, someone help us." A female marshal walked calmly around the edge of the table. She reached out and plucked the smartphone directly from Savannah's manicured hand. "Hey!" Savannah shrieked, reaching for the device. "That is my property. Give it back." The marshal powered down the phone and slipped it into a clear plastic evidence bag. "You just recorded yourself in the presence of federal suspects. during the execution of a warrant, the marshal stated in a flat, bored tone. The device is now confiscated as physical evidence of financial conspiracy and potential witness tampering. Savannah froze, her empty hands suspended in the air. The realization that her digital shield was gone left her looking incredibly small. Derek, sitting next to her, watched the phone disappear into the evidence bag. He looked at the marshals. He looked at Thomas, hyperventilating in handcuffs. Then Derek stood up. He stepped away from his wife. He raised his hands, palms forward, signaling his surrender to the authorities. "I have nothing to do with these people," Derek yelled, his voice echoing with frantic self-preservation. "I did not know where the money came from. I thought they were rich. I am filing for divorce today. I want it on the record right now. I am leaving her." Savannah whipped her head around, staring at the man she married less than a month ago. Derek did not look back at her. He backed toward the boardroom wall, desperate to distance himself from the sinking ship he had so eagerly boarded. I sat perfectly still at the head of the table. Liam stood directly behind my chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders, a steady, immovable anchor amidst the chaos. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I watched the family that drained me for 33 years destroy themselves in under 3 minutes. The marshals began to escort the prisoners toward the heavy oak doors. Harrison wept openly, his head bowed. Thomas shuffled his feet, his gaze fixed on the carpet, his breathing still ragged and shallow. As the lead marshal guided Thomas past the center of the table, Barbara broke her silence. My mother had watched the entire scene unfold in mute horror. Now, seeing her husband and her son being led away to face federal prison, the reality of her destitute future crashed down upon her. She lunged forward. She bypassed the marshals and scrambled toward my end of the table. Her designer handbag fell to the floor, spilling its contents across the carpet. Geneviève Barbara screamed, her voice a hysterical, grating pitch. "Geneviève, please, you have to stop them." She reached across the mahogany wood, her fingers clawing at the empty air inches from my face. "You have the money," Barbara begged, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "You have your savings. You own that house. You have to pay their bail. You have to hire the lawyers. You are the only one left. Please, Jenny, you have to save us." The heavy oak doors clicked shut. The metallic clatter of handcuffs and the heavy boots of the federal marshals faded down the carpeted hallway. The boardroom felt vast and empty. The silence that followed the arrests carried a suffocating weight. Only 4 of us remained at the long mahogany table: me, Liam, Savannah, and my mother. Derek had fled into the corridor moments before the marshals secured the perimeter, leaving his new bride sitting alone. Barbara remained hunched over the polished wood. Her tears ruined her expensive foundation, leaving pale streaks down her cheeks. Her manicured hands trembled. She stared at me, waiting for a lifeline. She expected the ingrained conditioning of 33 years to kick in. She assumed the reliable daughter would open her checkbook, hire a defense firm, and sacrifice her own stability to rescue the men who just tried to ruin her. I did not reach for my checkbook. I reached into my leather tote bag. "You asked me to pay $12,000 for Savannah's catering." "Mom," I said. My voice was calm, anchoring the chaotic energy in the room. "You stood in the hotel lobby while Aunt Brenda laughed at me, and you demanded I cover a fabricated invoice. You told me family helps family." I opened the manila folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a high-resolution optical scan provided by my bank. The front displayed the check I wrote from Apex Holdings. The back displayed the endorsement signature. I placed my index finger on the paper and pushed it across the smooth mahogany surface. It glided to a stop inches from my mother's trembling hands. "Look at it," I instructed. Barbara lowered her eyes. She recognized her own looping cursive signature on the endorsement line. She sniffled, failing to comprehend the danger resting in front of her. "I paid the invoice," I continued, "but I did not write a personal check. I drafted those funds from a registered corporate entity. By endorsing that document and transferring the cash to Harrison, you did not just facilitate a wedding expense. You acted as an unlicensed financial courier. You moved corporate capital across state lines into a fraudulent shell company. The federal government calls that acting as a money mule. It is a key component of a money laundering operation. Barbara's breath hitched. She looked up from the scanned image. The desperate hope in her eyes morphed into sharp, cold terror. If I hand this specific scan to the undercover agent waiting in the lobby, you will not be looking for a bail bondsman for Thomas, I explained. You will be needing one for yourself. The prosecutors will indict you as a willing accessory to wire fraud. Barbara shrank back into her chair. She pulled her hands away from the table as if the scanned check were glowing hot. The realization paralyzed her. She could not advocate for her husband or her son without implicating herself in their federal crimes. I had severed her ability to fight back. I'm going to keep this document out of the primary evidence pile, I told her. I will omit your name from the final forensic audit submitted to the authorities. I am offering you your freedom on one non-negotiable condition. I leaned forward slightly, ensuring my gaze locked onto hers. You will never contact me again, I said. You will not call my phone. You will not drive to my house. You will not send letters. You will pretend you do not have an older daughter. If you violate this boundary even once, this check goes directly to the lead prosecutor. Barbara opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to work. She nodded, once a jerky, defeated motion. At the far end of the table, Savannah let out a bitter, jagged laugh. This is insane, Savannah snapped. Her mascara stained her cream pantsuit. Her phone was gone, confiscated by the authorities. Her husband had abandoned her. She glared at me with pure venom. You cannot do this. You cannot just freeze our lives. I have vendor contracts. I have a lease. I need access to my accounts right now. I need my money. I shifted my attention to the young woman who spent her honeymoon funds blaming me for her ruined vacation. You do not have any money, Savannah, I stated. You never did. You spent venture capital stolen by your father. But your specific accounts are currently empty for a very different reason. Savannah gripped the armrests of her chair. What are you talking about? I turned back to the manila folder. I did not need to show her a document. The explanation required no visual aids. Elias Thorne employs the most ruthless corporate litigators in the state, I explained. When I showed them the transaction ledger for our late grandmother's estate, they recognized an opportunity. They knew the federal government would eventually freeze every account associated with the Perry family name. Once the government seizes assets, reclaiming stolen funds takes years of bureaucratic litigation. We did not have years. Savannah's eyes darted back and forth. She was struggling to follow the legal mechanics. Before Elias invited you to this boardroom, his legal team filed an emergency ex parte motion with a civil judge, I continued. They presented irrefutable proof that Thomas embezzled $50,000 from a dedicated trust and wired it directly into your personal travel account. The judge granted an immediate, targeted clawback. The color drained from Savannah's face. Yesterday morning, while you were busy filming videos trying to ruin my career, the bank executed the court order, I said. They reached into your domestic accounts and legally extracted $50,000. They reclaimed every cent of the wedding fund Thomas stole from me. The federal marshals locked down the rest of your assets an hour ago. You have zero capital remaining. Barbara gasped. She looked at Savannah, then looked back at me. But the commercial loan, Barbara stammered, her voice weak. The bank in Atlanta put a $500,000 lien on your townhouse. You still owe that debt. You will lose your home. I shook my head. Liam stepped forward, moving from behind my chair to stand at my shoulder. The lender in Atlanta operates under strict federal compliance laws, Liam stated. His voice was a deep, resonant hum in the quiet boardroom. When our real estate attorney informed them their loan officer accepted a forged power of attorney to secure a commercial note, they faced a severe regulatory crisis. Accepting fraudulent collateral is a fast track to losing a banking license. They dropped the lien voluntarily, I added, picking up the narrative. To avoid a federal inquiry into their underwriting department, they dissolved the encumbrance on my property. They will have to join the long line of unsecured creditors trying to sue Thomas for restitution. My title is clear. I looked at the two women sitting across the mahogany divide. I took the $50,000 your lawyers clawed back from Savannah, I explained. I used $30,000 to pay off my original, legitimate mortgage. The remaining $20,000 is sitting in my personal savings. The townhouse you tried to leverage to save yourselves is now fully mine. I own the walls. I own the roof. I owe nothing to anyone. The silence that blanketed the room was absolute. The intricate web of lies, theft, and manipulation they spun for years had been surgically dismantled. I had neutralized their threats, reclaimed my stolen inheritance, and secured my foundation. There is no money left for high-priced defense lawyers, I told them, my tone remaining factual and unyielding. There is no money left for bail bondsmen. There is no money left for private aviation or designer clothes. The resources you relied upon to project your superiority no longer exist. Barbara stared at me. Her shoulders slumped. The rigid posture of the country club matriarch collapsed, leaving behind a frail, terrified woman facing a destitute reality. She looked at the scanned check resting near her hands. She looked at the empty chairs where her husband and son had been sitting moments prior. She raised her eyes to meet mine. The venom was gone, replaced by a hollow, profound defeat. "You ruined this family," Barbara whispered. The words barely carried across the polished wood. I reached out and closed the manila folder. I slipped the evidence file back into my leather tote bag. I secured the brass clasp. I stood up from the heavy leather chair and looked down at the woman who spent my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. "No," I replied, my voice ringing clear and steady in the silent room. "I audited it. The math ruined you." I turned my back on the table. Liam placed his hand on the small of my back. We walked across the plush carpet together. We did not look back. We stepped through the heavy oak doors, leaving the ruins of the Perry family behind us, and walked out into the bright, clear afternoon. 6 months passed. The crisp autumn air over Charlotte surrendered to a bitter winter, which eventually thawed into a bright, clear spring. Time moves differently when you are no longer carrying the weight of someone else's fabricated reality. The federal justice system does not care about country club memberships or pristine banking legacies. When the prosecutors presented the signed affidavits alongside the offshore routing ledgers the defense attorneys Thomas and Harrison hired on credit, advised them to take a plea deal. A trial would have only exposed more rot. The sentencing hearing lasted less than 2 hours. I did not attend. I read the summary in a brief email forwarded by Elias Thorne. Thomas received 8 years in a federal penitentiary. The judge cited the exploitation of his banking credentials and the predatory nature of the identity theft as aggravating factors. The patriarch who used to dictate family dinners from the head of the table now dictates his schedule around cell counts and yard time. His tailored charcoal suits were traded for a standard-issue khaki uniform. Harrison received 5 years. The tech visionary who billed his own mother for fake catering services crumbled during his allocution. He wept in front of the magistrate, blaming his father, blaming the market, blaming everything except his own entitlement. He entered a minimum security facility in Virginia. The Golden Boy became a federal inmate number. The fallout left the women of the Perry family navigating a harsh, unfamiliar landscape. Barbara lost the sprawling house in the suburbs. The civil asset forfeitures and the mounting legal debts swallowed her lifestyle whole. She moved into a small 2-bedroom rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. The social circle she spent decades cultivating vanished overnight. The church elders who walked out of my living room made sure her name became a cautionary tale among the congregation. The country club revoked her membership. Her phone, which used to ring constantly with invitations to charity galas and luncheons, went permanently silent. She upheld our bargain. She never called me. She never sent a letter. The fear of the endorsed LLC check sitting in my evidence file kept her tethered to her isolation. But the most profound shift, the true scale of poetic justice, fell upon Savannah. Derek filed for divorce the morning after the boardroom arrests. He cited irreconcilable differences, packed his designer athletic wear, and fled back to his parents' house in Atlanta. Stripped of her husband, her stolen trust funds, and her influencer status, Savannah faced immediate bankruptcy. The vendors she hired for her lifestyle sued her for breach of contract. The bank seized her leased luxury vehicle. She needed an income to survive. With a resume consisting entirely of beauty pageants and sponsored social media posts, her options were severely limited. Following the successful resolution of the venture capital fraud case, Catherine Sterling called me into her office. She did not just praise my handling of the crisis, she offered me an equity stake in the firm. I accepted the promotion to senior partner. 3 weeks ago, I walked into the lobby of Sterling & Associates. The marble floors gleamed under the recessed lighting. I carried my usual leather briefcase, preparing for a morning of client audits. I stepped through the glass doors and looked toward the front reception desk. Sarah, our former coordinator, had been promoted to human resources. In her place sat a new hire. The staffing agency we utilized specialized in placing entry-level administrative candidates who needed immediate employment. Savannah sat behind the curved mahogany reception desk. She wore a plain, off-the-rack black blazer. Her hair was pulled back into a severe utilitarian knot. She was staring at a glowing multi-line phone console, a look of profound bewilderment plastered across her face. She looked up as the glass doors shut behind me. Our eyes met. The young woman who stood in an airport terminal and commanded 50,000 followers to destroy my career was now earning $15 an hour to answer my phone calls. She was tasked with sorting my mail, scheduling my appointments, and greeting my clients. She was the gatekeeper to the very empire she tried to burn down. The blood drained from Savannah's face. Her hands hovered over the cheap plastic keyboard. She expected me to gloat. She expected me to walk over, lean against the desk, and deliver a crushing, vindictive monologue. I did nothing of the sort. Vindictiveness requires an emotional investment I no longer possessed. "Good morning, Savannah," I said. My voice was brisk, professional, and entirely devoid of sisterly affection. "The quarterly tax files for the Henderson account should arrive by courier at 10. Please bring them directly to my office." I did not wait for her reply. I walked down the hallway, the click of my heels echoing off the polished walls, leaving her trapped in the invisible prison of her own making. The irony was a heavy, silent weight she would have to carry every single day she clocked into work. The scene shifts from the sterile corporate corridors of Charlotte to the rolling, verdant peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The air up here tasted clean, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. Liam and I rented an understated, elegant timber lodge overlooking a vast valley. There were no imported orchids dripping from the ceiling. There was no string quartet playing in the corner. There was no professional photographer barking orders at a bloated wedding party. We invited 30 people, close friends, trusted colleagues, and neighbors who had proven their worth through years of quiet, steady support. The wooden chairs were arranged in 3 short rows on a grassy bluff facing the mountain range. I stood near the back of the arrangement, waiting for the acoustic guitar to begin playing a simple folk melody. I wore a sleek, unadorned ivory gown. I did not carry a large bouquet. I held a single white rose. I looked down the aisle. Liam stood at the altar under an arch of woven birch branches. He wore a dark navy suit. He looked handsome, grounded, and incredibly safe. He caught my eye and offered that familiar, steady nod, the same nod he gave me when he barricaded my front door, the same nod he offered in the boardroom when the marshals arrived. I looked at the guests seated on the bluff. In the 3rd row, sitting near the aisle, was Elias Thorne. The venture capitalist wore a tailored gray suit holding a printed program in his hands. He caught my gaze and offered a small, respectful smile. A silent acknowledgement between 2 people who understood the exact cost of the peace surrounding us. The guitar music swelled a gentle rhythm carrying over the mountain breeze. I took a step forward. I walked down the aisle alone. There was no father waiting to take my arm. There was no patriarch preparing to hand me over like a financial transaction. I did not walk alone because I was abandoned. I walked alone because I owned myself. I was the sole proprietor of my life, my choices, and my future. As I approached the altar and placed my hand in Liam's, the journey of the last 6 months crystallized into a sharp, undeniable truth. Society tells you that loyalty to family is an unbreakable contract. They condition you to believe that shared blood requires endless forgiveness, infinite patience, and silent suffering. They tell you to keep the peace, to absorb the insults, to pay the bills, and to stay in your assigned seat at table 19. But loyalty without accountability is just extortion. When a family demands your resources while discarding your humanity, they are not asking for love. They are demanding a subsidy. They rely on your guilt to fuel their machinery. They assume the responsible child, the quiet sibling, the dependable scapegoat, will never fight back because the fear of rocking the boat is too great. They thought my silence meant weakness. They mistook my stoicism for submission. They did not understand that for an auditor, silence is simply a workspace. It was just the time I needed to pull the ledgers, map the routing numbers, and build an irrefutable case. I stand here today, breathing clean mountain air, unburdened by the weight of their fabricated reality. I lift my left hand. The sunlight catches the brilliant, clear diamond resting on my ring finger. A genuine smile breaks across my face, reaching my eyes, warming the cool mountain wind. They called me the ugly one. They tried not to mention. Now I am the one they can never forget, and they cannot afford to speak my name. Thank you for tuning in to Olivia Stories Revenge. If this journey reminded you that your peace is worth protecting and that setting boundaries is the ultimate form of self-respect, please hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet strength, calculated justice, and the moments when the truth finally stands up on its own. Until next time, keep your ledgers clean and your standards high. We often think of the American family as a sanctuary. It is supposed to be the one place where the doors are locked against the harshness of the outside world, where the people inside offer unconditional shelter. We are raised on the ideal that a home is a foundation built on fairness, honesty, and mutual respect. But Genevieve Perry's story forces us to look in the mirror and ask a terrifying question. What happens when the predators are not waiting outside the door, but are sitting at the head of the dining room table? The tragedy of the Perry family is not just a story about wire fraud, offshore bank accounts, or forged signatures. At its core, it is a profound failure of parenting. It is a cautionary tale about what happens when the superficial pressures of modern American culture overwrite the fundamental duties of raising a child. Thomas and Barbara Perry did not raise children. They curated a portfolio. They looked at their offspring and assigned them roles based entirely on utility and optics. Harrison was the speculative tech stock, full of charismatic promise and empty metrics. Savannah was the marketing campaign, dressed in designer clothes to project an illusion of boundless wealth. And Genevieve was the municipal bond. She was the boring, stable, reliable asset that existed solely to be liquidated when the risky investments inevitably failed. When parents assign roles rather than nurturing individuals, they destroy the moral fabric of the home. True family responsibility requires emotional awareness. It requires looking at your children and recognizing their intrinsic value independent of what they can achieve, earn, or project to the neighborhood. By designating a golden child and a scapegoat, Thomas and Barbara guaranteed the destruction of all three of their children. They taught Savannah that her worth was tied to her aesthetic, leaving her entirely unequipped to survive when the stolen money dried up. They taught Harrison that the appearance of success was more important than actual hard work, turning him into a hollow frontman willing to commit federal crimes to maintain the illusion. And they taught Genevieve that she was a burden, a utility, the ugly one sitting at table 19. But in their arrogance, they failed to realize that by forcing Genevieve to fend for herself, they accidentally gave her the one thing the favored children lacked. They gave her resilience. They gave her clarity. There is a phrase that echoes through millions of homes across the country: Family helps family. In a healthy environment, this phrase is a beautiful sentiment. It means showing up during illnesses, supporting each other through job losses, and offering a steady hand during life transitions. But in a toxic family structure, those three words are weaponized. They become an instrument of extortion. Parents who lack integrity use the concept of loyalty as a bludgeon to enforce compliance. They demand endless financial and emotional subsidies from the responsible child, labeling any attempt at setting boundaries as an act of betrayal. Long-term guidance for children requires teaching them the difference between love and obligation. It requires demonstrating that accountability is not the opposite of loyalty. It is the very bedrock of it. If we want to raise well-adjusted adults in a society that constantly pushes us to acquire more, to show off more, and to outshine our peers, we must anchor our homes in rigid honesty. We must teach our children that a modest life, lived with a clean conscience, is infinitely more valuable than a luxury lifestyle built on deception. Consider the ultimate outcome of Thomas Perry's parenting strategy. He spent 4 decades building a pristine legacy at his country club and his bank. He wanted to be seen as a titan of his community. But because he raised his son without a moral compass, the moment the federal marshals produced a pair of steel handcuffs, Harrison did not hesitate. The golden boy turned around and pointed a trembling finger directly at his father. The unshakable family loyalty they demanded from Genevieve dissolved in an instant when faced with the consequences of their own actions. They turned on each other like starving animals because there was no foundation of real love to hold them together. There was only the shared terror of getting caught. This is the legacy of raising children without fairness and emotional awareness. You do not build a family. You build a cartel. And cartels always collapse from the inside. Genevieve walking down the aisle alone in the Blue Ridge Mountains is a powerful image of reclamation. She did not need anyone to give her away because she had already bought back her own freedom. She audited the math of her childhood and realized the deficit was never hers to carry. She broke the generational cycle of exploitation by choosing truth over tradition. She proves that we are not obligated to go down with the sinking ship simply because we share a bloodline with the captain who drilled the holes. Stories like this one resonate because they tap into a silent epidemic hidden behind closed doors and manicured lawns. If you have ever been the backup plan, the financial safety net, or the child who had to earn your place at a table where others were seated for free, you know the quiet ache of that realization. You know the exact moment the illusion shatters. Thank you for spending your time with Olivia Stories Revenge. If this narrative offered you a moment of clarity, or if it gave you the courage to examine the ledgers of your own relationships, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. We share these stories to remind you that your peace is worth protecting, and that walking away from toxicity is not a failure. It is a rescue mission. As you go about your day, take a moment to look at the people you hold close. Look at the children you are guiding and the expectations you are placing upon their shoulders. Are we raising them to be authentic, honest, and kind? Or are we raising them to protect our own fragile egos? The answers to these questions will dictate the shape of our futures. We all want to believe we are building a sanctuary, but when the dust settles and the guests go home, we must sit in the quiet of our own dining rooms and wonder, are the chairs at our table filled out of love, or are they filled out of obligation? And if the door were left wide open, who would choose to stay?